The story begins with two men sailing on a small boat along a river between the mountains. Standing quietly on the boat, our protagonist narrowed his eyes and thought that it had been a long journey. The scene then shifted to the past. Inside the clan palace, chaos filled the area. Our protagonist struggled while being held back by a man with tears in his eyes. In front of them was the aftermath of his mother's death. His father stood with his back turned and coldly ordered everyone to stop causing a scene and leave immediately. He also ordered that the incident must never be spoken of outside the clan. Hearing those words, our protagonist was shocked. His father then declared that from that day onward, the Bakley clan would not seek revenge. Unable to understand, our protagonist demanded an explanation while trying to break free. His father replied that everything was being done for the sake of the clan and warned him not to recklessly pursue revenge. Furious, our protagonist shouted that his father could not even avenge his own wife or speak against those responsible. In his anger, he declared that his father was not worthy of being called a man. Sometime later, our protagonist decided to leave the clan. He realized he was still too weak to take revenge. As he ran away from the Bakley clan, he vowed to grow stronger, establish his own sect, gather followers, and build enough power to punish everyone involved in his mother's death, including those who stayed silent. Even if it took decades, he intended to make them pay. 12 years passed. Inside a burning sect building, a middle-aged man desperately begged for mercy. He tried to negotiate, offering anything our protagonist wanted, and even suggesting he could persuade the Murim Alliance as well. Now fully grown, our protagonist stood calmly with long black hair and a bloodied, broken sword in his hand. He ignored the man's pleas and quietly stared at the damaged blade. The man continued shouting, insisting that his offer was reasonable. Our protagonist finally answered that there was indeed something he wanted. The man immediately became hopeful and asked what it was. Our protagonist laughed lightly and answered that he wanted the man's life. The man became irritated and warned him to stop joking around. In response, our protagonist calmly raised his broken sword and said that if the man would not hand it over willingly, he would simply take it himself. Enraged, the man threatened to tear him apart. In the next moment, our protagonist suddenly appeared behind him and remarked that the man's mouth was as filthy as his face. He struck the man in the back with his fist, sending him crashing through the floor and creating a crater below. Our protagonist quietly watched the crater with a bored expression. Suddenly, the man leaped out from behind him and attempted another attack, shouting that he would send our protagonist's head to the Murim Alliance. Without panic, our protagonist drew his sword and cleanly sliced the man in half from head to toe. Afterward, he walked through the burning building and opened the main gate while still holding the bloodied sword. Outside, a brown-haired girl named Moyong Hyong greeted him while carrying a scroll. She explained that she had been told to deliver it once the task was complete. Although his face was covered in blood, our protagonist smiled brightly as he accepted the scroll and thanked her for waiting. Moyong awkwardly suggested that he wipe the blood off his face first. Our protagonist opened the scroll and read through it. After finishing, he used the blood on his face to write something onto the document with his fingers. While looking at the scroll, he smiled to himself and wondered whether this was truly the end or perhaps a new beginning. He then tossed the scroll back to Moyong and told her to deliver it to the Murim Alliance because he was retiring. Moyong asked whether he planned to return to his hometown. He replied that he had already accomplished everything he wanted within the Alliance. She then asked if she could visit him someday after retiring as well. Our protagonist agreed and joked that she should come find him if she ever became bored. When she asked where she could find him, he turned back with a smile and answered, Hubei Province, Hualong County. The scene shifted back to the present. Still sailing on the river, our protagonist reflected on the past 12 years. After leaving his clan, he had joined the Murim Alliance and developed his own martial arts. Through his achievements, he eventually rose to the rank of captain. Now, at last, the time had come to establish his own sect. He had saved enough money to buy a manor, and the perfect property had recently gone up for sale. Holding a pouch of money, he grinned happily and laughed himself. Pointing toward the sky, he loudly declared that even the heavens seemed to be helping him. The middle-aged boat peddler awkwardly laughed and wondered if he had picked up a crazy passenger. Our protagonist quickly apologized for getting carried away. He explained that he was on his way to complete the purchase of a manor for the sect he had always dreamed of creating. The peddler asked whether he was a young sect leader. While rowing the boat, he quietly muttered to himself that there was only one manor available nearby, and wondered if it was the rumored haunted property. Noticing the muttering, our protagonist asked what he had said. The peddler brushed it off and simply wished for the future Sect to prosper safely. Adjusting his straw hat, our protagonist thanked him confidently and remarked that all that remained was signing the contract. Soon after, the scene shifted to the manor itself. The moment he saw the condition of the place, our protagonist froze in disbelief. The seller, Yiriang, proudly spread his arms and described the manor as spacious and grand. Our protagonist immediately grabbed Yiriang by the clothes and accused him of attempting to scam him. Panicking, Yiriang insisted that the property had been extremely difficult to obtain and begged him to look around before making a decision. After calming down, our protagonist entered the manor with him. Inside, the place was covered in dust and clearly abandoned for a very long time. While walking through the grounds, Yiriang explained that the manor contained 45 rooms spread across the main and side buildings, along with 5 training halls, including 1 large hall. Curious, our protagonist asked which sect had originally owned such a place. Yiriang admitted he did not know because the manor was ancient, though he insisted it would become an excellent sect headquarters after some repairs. Although our protagonist agreed, he sensed there was a hidden problem and directly asked what was wrong with the place. Yiriang crossed his arms and admitted that every previous owner had mysteriously died from sudden heart failure on the very first night after purchasing the manor. Because of this, rumors spread that the place was haunted. Even bodyguards and exorcists had failed to prevent the deaths. Hearing this, our protagonist stared at him threateningly and asked if he was seriously trying to sell him such a property. Sweating heavily, Yiriang quickly explained that this was exactly why he was selling it for 1/10 of its normal value. The moment our protagonist heard the price, his attitude completely changed. Laughing cheerfully, he grabbed Yiriang's hand and handed him the payment pouch, saying he had almost misunderstood his intentions. Tears streamed down Yiriang's face as he accepted the money and handed over the deed, praising him as expected of a captain from the Murim Alliance. Our protagonist accepted the deed with satisfaction. At that moment, a strange system notification suddenly appeared before his eyes, stating that the deed had been received. Our protagonist froze in shock as his body trembled slightly. Yiriang noticed his reaction and asked what was wrong, but our protagonist dismissed it as nothing. Afterward, Yiriang left while joking that if our protagonist survived a single night there, he should come visit him again. Once alone, our protagonist shut the doors and shouted excitedly that he finally owned his very own manor. The sudden loud voice frightened the people outside, causing them to run away in fear. Overjoyed, he slapped one of the pillars while laughing and declared that all he needed now were disciples. Dust immediately scattered everywhere from the impact. Covering his mouth, he realized he should probably clean the manor first. He then began cleaning the entire place at high speed. He wiped the floors, cleaned the ceilings, polished the pillars, and carried buckets of water through the halls until only the main hall remained. Satisfied, he opened the doors to the main hall and prepared to finish the last bit of cleaning. Inside the room, however, he noticed a long sword placed in the center. Curious, he approached it and wondered if the previous owner had left it behind. Thinking it might sell for a decent price, he smiled and began unsheathing the sword. The instant he drew it, his eyes widened. The room suddenly transformed into a battle simulation. Confused, our protagonist looked around as a system notification appeared before him. It identified him as the evaluatee, stated that the objective was sect establishment, and displayed his overall grade as 2nd grade, while noting that he held the highest rank among all evaluators. Still confused, he questioned what was happening. Suddenly, a small metal orb shot past him at tremendous speed. Although he barely avoided it by leaning backward, it still grazed his face and cut several strands of hair. Fully alert now, he unsheathed the sword completely and looked toward the small crater created by the orb. Another notification appeared, announcing that the test difficulty was being adjusted. Recalling Yiriang's explanation, our protagonist realized that this was likely what had killed the previous owners. As he pieced things together, a cannon emerged from the wall of the simulation chamber. The system announced the beginning of the test and labeled the difficulty as extreme. Our protagonist drew his sword confidently and accepted the challenge head-on. Another notification identified the trial as the test of martial prowess. Immediately afterward, the cannons began firing steel orbs toward him. Our protagonist moved rapidly through the room, dodging and slicing apart every incoming attack, while proudly declaring that he would show why he had once served as a captain of the Murim Alliance. After a long exchange, the firing briefly stopped. Looking down, he realized his sword had been severely damaged. Before he could react further, the attacks resumed, forcing him to barely dodge another barrage. Sliding outside the cannon's firing range, he noticed the attack stop and concluded that the area beyond the wall was safe. While resting briefly, he observed that his sword was close to breaking. Suddenly, another sword appeared before him. Surprised, he picked it up and realized the system was providing replacements. Carefully studying the battlefield, he noticed that the cannons were protecting something on the opposite side of the room. He immediately rushed forward. The moment he neared the center, multiple additional cannons emerged from the walls and opened fire simultaneously. Caught off guard, our protagonist rapidly sliced apart the incoming steel orbs while continuing to advance. Eventually, his sword shattered in half. Angered, he struck directly at the cannons, creating a massive explosion that filled the room with debris. At that moment, he activated his martial techniques, flowing Moon Stride and Phantom Field. Energy surrounded his blade as he rushed through the center of the room and unleashed Crescent Slash. He drove the sword into the floor with tremendous force. The recoil pushed him backward, and the sword shattered completely. Immediately afterward, the simulation collapsed. Our protagonist returned to the original room inside the manor. Still crouched from the impact, he slowly stood up while gripping the remains of the broken sword. Thinking the attack was not over yet, he prepared himself for more steel orbs. However, the broken sword suddenly disappeared from his hands. A system notification then announced that the test had concluded. Looking around, our protagonist noticed that the manor itself now appeared restored and much newer than before. Exhausted, he sat down on the floor. Another notification appeared, informing him that he had passed the test of martial prowess and that all manor functions had been unlocked at their highest grade. Soon after, a sword surrounded by a blue aura floated before him. Surprised, our protagonist wondered if the system was rewarding him with a weapon. He stood up, grabbed the sword by its hilt, and remarked that after everything he had gone through, the reward was only fair. Another blue notification then appeared, explaining that the trial would conclude once he named the manor. Our protagonist looked at the message and commented that now it wanted him to choose a name as well. Closing his eyes briefly, he smiled and declared that he had already decided. Placing one hand on his waist, he confidently announced the name of his sect, the Righteous Heavens Sect. The system immediately confirmed the registration of the manor under that name. At the same time, a white symbol appeared imprinted on his hand. As the system continued its announcements, our protagonist sheathed his sword in irritation and demanded that whatever ghost or spirit lived inside the manor should reveal itself already. Instead, another system notification appeared before him. Initializing the Sect system. Seeing the message, our protagonist stared in shock. Someone hurried down the long corridor before Beakley Woon forcefully pushed open the door to Yang's room. Yang, who had been calmly writing inside, looked up in confusion and tried asking if something had happened the previous night. Before he could finish, Beakley Woon grabbed him by the collar and angrily demanded an explanation about the strange thing following him since last night. According to the contract, only the buyer was supposed to see it, yet this unknown system notification kept appearing beside him. When Beakley Woon pointed at it in frustration, Yang could only stare blankly because he could not see anything at all. He wondered if Beakley Woon had injured his head somehow. Exhausted and irritated, Beakley Woon eventually dropped into a chair while muttering curses under his breath. Yang casually suggested taking the estate back if it bothered him that much, but Beakley Woon immediately refused since he still needed the estate. Hearing that, Yang reminded him that he should focus on preparing for the Sect founding ceremony, because there would be plenty of work ahead. Beakley Woon then explained that he wanted around 20 sets of ritual robes made and asked if there was a good fabric shop nearby. Yang said he could recommend a few places, though making deals would not be easy because most merchants were trying to connect themselves with Dragon Hall. Seeing Beakley Woon's confusion, Yang explained that Dragon Hall was a powerful trading guild that had supplied fabrics to the imperial court for generations. Their influence across the martial world was enormous, and even major sects avoided offending them. He also joked that fabrics from Dragon Hall were far beyond Beakley Woon's budget anyway. Though embarrassed, Beakley Woon admitted it was true. Yang then added that merchants might refuse to trade because rumors had already spread that the estate was haunted. He advised Beakley Woon to simply visit the fabric district himself. At that moment, the strange system notification beside them reacted as if offended by being called ghosts or devils. Annoyed, Beakley Woon snapped at it to stay quiet. Still confused, he suddenly realized something important. The contract had only been signed the previous day, so how had the rumors spread so quickly already? Yiriang nervously raised his teacup and tried to avoid the topic by commenting that rumors naturally travel fast. That reaction alone gave Beakley Woon the answer he needed. His expression turned cold as he accused Yiriang of spreading the story himself. Trying to defend himself, Yiriang argued that it could count as publicity for the sect. If people heard that Beakley Woon was alive and unharmed after moving into the estate, it would prove the place was safe. Instead of calming him down, the explanation only made Beakley Woon angrier. He blamed Yiriang for dragging him into ownership of a haunted estate in the first place. Later, while visiting the fabric district, Beakley Woon tried greeting merchants politely, but before he could properly explain himself, one after another refused to sell to him and slammed their doors shut. One person even threw a bowl directly at him while yelling for the cursed owner of the haunted estate to leave. Beakley Woon stood there trembling with anger, repeatedly reminding himself to stay calm and avoid looking insane during his first public impression. Just then, a commotion nearby caught his attention. A young boy was desperately holding onto a man's pant leg, refusing to let go while begging him to save his sick sister. The man, however, reacted with irritation and tried to shake the child off. At that moment, an elderly man rushed over, calling out an alarm and addressing the boy by name. He asked what had happened. The boy, Xiao Wu, immediately accused the fighters of deception, saying they had promised to heal his sister and taken all his money instead. The accused man snapped back and struck Xiao Wu across the face, harshly declaring that his sister's condition was beyond help and that even the clinics had abandoned her. Hearing this, the old man stepped forward in anger, questioning their conduct and recognizing their attire as belonging to the White Sword Sect. He criticized them for treating a child so violently. Nearby, another member of the White Sword Sect stood by and instructed his companion to resolve the matter quickly and avoid drawing attention from their sect master. With a nod of agreement, the man drew his sword and coldly stated that the boy had refused to leave earlier despite being told to go. The old man, named China Myong, stared back and asked if they truly intended to stain their hands with blood over this. Before anything further could happen, Beakley Woon suddenly intervened from behind and struck one of the men with a flying kick, knocking him to the ground. The accomplice froze in shock. He then demanded to know who Beakley Woon was. Standing between the old man and the boy, Beakley Woon calmly introduced himself as the sect master of the Righteous Heaven sect, adding that while the title was still new, respect should still be given when asked. The White Sword sect member reacted angrily, insulting his unknown sect and accusing him of interfering in their affairs. He rushed forward, but Beakley Woon sidestepped and countered in a single motion, injuring the attacker's forearm and forcing him down. As the man writhed in pain, Beakley Woon remarked that judging others purely by reputation was a mistake, especially without understanding their actual strength. Another White Sword sect member immediately charged in, threatening him and declaring that opposing their sect would have consequences. Beakley Woon simply replied that he did not know what that meant and calmly struck him down with a single punch, leaving him in the same state as the first. The remaining man, now shaken, questioned whether Beakley Woon was the one connected to the rumor about a merchant group acquiring a haunted estate under the Murim Alliance. He expressed disbelief at how far the rumor had spread. At the same time, Yiriang, sitting elsewhere, choked on his drink in shock upon hearing the situation had escalated further. Beakley Woon then pointedly remarked that because of the rumor, he had been unable to purchase the ritual robes he needed. He pressed the remaining opponent for an answer, while casually provoking him to step forward instead of hiding behind others. The man, unable to tolerate the provocation, launched himself forward and accused Beakley Woon of challenging the White Sword sect, vowing to make him pay for his arrogance. His strike came down, but Beakley Woon had already moved out of its path. Just then, the previously defeated White Sword sect member suddenly got back on his feet and rushed in to attack Beakley Woon from behind. In response, Beakley Woon quickly assessed both directions as the two opponents closed in on him at the same time. Despite the pressure, he remained composed. He reacted instantly, striking one man's face with his left elbow while delivering an upward punch into the other man's abdomen. The second attacker cried out in pain and fell to the ground. At the same time, the man's sword was driven into the ground nearby as he collapsed. Beakley Woon then addressed them firmly, stating that if they considered this a challenge, he would accept it as such. He added that he was always open to sparring and warned them to leave and not worsen the situation if they valued their condition. After forcing the White Sword Sect members to retreat, he turned to the old man and the boy and asked if they were unharmed. Shu, who had been carefully watching the fight, then spoke up and asked if Beekly Woon was looking for someone skilled in sewing ritual robes. Beekly Woon asked for clarification, and Shu explained that his sister was highly skilled at sewing and requested help for her condition in return. He then bowed deeply in gratitude. Beekly Woon quickly refused, clarifying that medical issues should be handled by a physician. At that moment, the system interface appeared again beside him, displaying new information about a potential partner ranked at Tier 3, though only Beekly Woon could see it. He reacted with mild curiosity, noting the rank and asking for more details. Shu then explained his situation in a subdued tone. Their parents had died the previous year, leaving only him and his sister. His sister's sewing skills had supported them, but recently she had developed a strange illness that caused her limbs to become painfully cold. Hearing this, Chin Gamyong let out a troubled breath, acknowledging the seriousness of a condition that made the limbs feel frozen. Beekly Woon then turned to him and respectfully asked for clarification. After a brief hesitation, Chin Gamyong revealed that he ran a small fabric shop in a nearby village and had often given work to the boy's sister. However, they had recently lost contact, which worried him. Shortly after, Shu led them quickly toward a thatched house. Upon arrival, he hesitated and looked around nervously, questioning whether the structure would even hold. Excited, he called out that he had brought a warrior who could drive away evil influences. Beekly Woon immediately corrected him, insisting that he was not such a person. Inside the house, they found Shu's sister sitting by a fire, warming her hands directly over the flames. Beekly Woon was momentarily stunned by the sight. She calmly greeted them, and when asked who she was, she responded without much concern. Beekly Woon observed the situation in silence, noting how she exposed her hands and feet to fire, yet remained composed. He concluded that her condition was likely more serious than expected. At the same time, the system issued a notice stating that the fire's heat was balancing the cold energy within her body. Beekly Woon considered whether this was related to a yin cold energy technique. After a pause, he introduced himself politely and explained that her brother had asked him to help. She identified herself simply, and Beekly Woon reacted with a quiet sigh, acknowledging the severity of her condition. Shu's sister gave a faint smile and explained that she needed to do this to prevent painful cold burns in her limbs. Still uncertain, Beekly Woon asked what she meant by cold burns. Meanwhile, Chin Gamyong stepped forward anxiously, calling out to her by name and asking what was happening. She greeted him weakly, surprised to see him there. He responded with concern, saying he had been worried after losing contact. She apologized softly, explaining that her condition had made communication difficult. At that moment, Beekly Woon urgently requested to check Sayo's pulse. She turned toward him with tired eyes and asked if he meant pulse diagnosis. He confirmed, saying he needed to examine her condition briefly. Without hesitation, she extended her hand. As soon as Beekly Woon placed a fingertip on her wrist, a surge of yin energy rushed into him. The system immediately issued a warning about excessive yin energy absorption, labeling it dangerous. Beekly Woon reacted with irritation and told it to stop alarming him unnecessarily. The system's analysis indicated that excessive yin energy had already invaded her body. Beekly Woon could also sense it instinctively, an overwhelming cold force circulating within her. After a moment of focus, he quietly said he understood her condition. Sayo reacted with hope, asking if that meant he had found a solution. He explained that her body likely had an unusual constitution that naturally attracted yin energy from the surroundings and stored it internally. He compared it to rare cases he had heard of, including the Sword Empress, the Master of the Sword Pavilion, and one of the 10 Heavens, known for her unmatched swordsmanship. Sayo listened in awe, admitting she did not fully understand but recognizing it sounded extraordinary. Beekly Woon then clarified that while such a constitution could be beneficial for martial artists, her case was different. She was absorbing too much yin energy while lacking sufficient yang energy to balance it. If the imbalance continued, her condition would become fatal within 3 months. He added that she likely already felt the effects. Unexpectedly, Sayo smiled calmly and said that if that was true, then there was no cure. She dismissed it as something beyond help. Chin Gamyong reacted immediately, suggesting the use of spirit elixirs, but Beekly Woon shook his head explaining that such remedies would only provide temporary relief and not solve the root problem. The condition would eventually worsen again. He began thinking about the core issue, how to restore stable yang energy within her body. At that moment, the system spoke directly into his mind, suggesting the use of essence to enhance recovery abilities, stamina, and inner energy regeneration. It noted the cost of activation as 50 essence and confirmed it could be used immediately. Beakley Woon felt slightly uneasy about the idea of boosting multiple internal functions at once. The system then issued a challenge task: recruit the first disciple. Hearing this, Beakley Woon paused. He realized that resolving Sayo's condition and taking on a disciple could be achieved at the same time. Without further hesitation, he spoke his conclusion and told her that he believed he had a solution. Then he extended his hand and directly asked her to become a disciple of the Righteous Heaven Sect. Sayo looked at him in confusion, asking why he was suddenly making such a request. Beakley Woon told her to trust him for now. However, she hesitated. Having never been involved in martial arts, she found the sudden offer suspicious. In her mind, she recalled how people in the martial world often spoke of righteousness while acting in self-interest, and how her own parents had died after being dragged into such conflicts. She assumed this man might also be using her situation for his own benefit. Her gaze lowered to Beakley Woon's hand, noticing visible signs of cold damage on it. This detail caused her pause. Beakley Woon looked at her steadily and made it clear that none of it mattered to him if he could save her life. In that moment, Sayo's heart began to race as she reconsidered her decision. She gave a faint, uncertain smile and accepted that she had no other option if it could truly save her. Finally, she clasped Beakley Woon's hand and asked him to take responsibility for her condition. The system immediately confirmed that the challenge task was complete and that the first disciple had been successfully recruited. It then advised that Sayo was suffering from cold burns caused by exposure to yin energy, and that essence could be used to activate recovery functions. At that moment, a wave of warmth spread through Sayo's body. She looked at her hands in shock, realizing they were slowly warming. The system indicated that her stamina and inner energy recovery rates had slightly improved. Beakley Woon observed the change and confirmed that the recovery process was working. He concentrated the spiritual energy, stabilizing her internal flow and gradually restoring balance to her yang energy. A faint sense of relief crossed his expression as he confirmed that the condition was improving. Sayo stared at her palms in disbelief, noticing the gradual return of normal sensation in her limbs. Nearby, Sayo rushed forward and embraced her tightly, calling out to her in relief. Chin Gamyong, observing the scene, asked if some form of healing technique had been used. Beakley Woon replied vaguely that it was something similar. Hearing this, the old man let out a light laugh, while Chin Gamyong expressed admiration for what he had witnessed, remarking that Beakley Woon's abilities were impressive. He added that he now understood why the Murim Alliance leader took interest in him. Beakley Woon reacted with curiosity, questioning whether the elder knew the Murim Alliance leader. By the flickering firelight, Chin Gamyong finally introduced himself properly. He revealed that he was the master of Dragon Hall, a major trading organization known for its influence and supply networks connected to the imperial court. Later that night, at the White Sword Sect, tension filled the hall as the sect master reprimanded his subordinates. He had heard that they were humiliated by an unknown sect and demanded answers. The subordinates knelt in fear and apologized repeatedly. In anger, the sect master struck one of them with a wooden board as a warning, declaring that their current suffering was insignificant compared to what was coming. He then ordered the rest to be taken to the punishment chamber despite their pleas for mercy. Even as they begged for forgiveness, his decision remained unchanged. Turning away coldly, he spoke of Beakley Woon and the Righteous Heaven Sect, stating that they would prepare a proper response for this humiliation. Meanwhile, Beakley Woon remained silent after hearing Chin Gamyong's true identity, realizing he was speaking to the master of Dragon Hall. He acknowledged that such a figure was far from ordinary. Sayo quickly bowed in apology for her earlier behavior, but Chin Gamyong dismissed her concerns casually. He then turned to Beakley Woon and extended an offer. He proposed that Beakley Woon join Dragon Hall, promising full support for whatever he wished to pursue. Beakley Woon remained calm and expressionless as he considered the offer, aware that Dragon Hall was a powerful merchant consortium supplying the imperial court with valuable goods. At that moment, the system updated with new information, identifying a Tier 1 lead connected to Dragon Hall. From Beakley Woon's understanding, Dragon Hall was a gathering point for countless experts, influential enough that even major sects would treat it cautiously. Its master held authority capable of influencing both orthodox and unorthodox factions within the Murim world. After evaluating the situation, Beakley Woon still hesitated. Although the opportunity was valuable, it did not align with the future he envisioned. After a brief pause, he calmly declined the offer, expressing gratitude but stating that he had already taken on his first disciple and could not accept. Shin Gamyeong was clearly displeased by the refusal and questioned whether Beakley Woon understood what it meant to reject Dragon Hall. Beakley Woon replied without hesitation, acknowledging the offer but instead proposing a partnership. He suggested that if cooperation was possible, he would build a reputation worthy of Dragon Hall's name. This response offended Shin Gamyeong, who felt the young sect master was being arrogant. He mocked the idea that an unestablished sect could bring honor to such a large organization. Beakley Woon remained steady and unfazed. He clarified that within 10 years, he intended to grow his sect into a force that could stand alongside the top orthodox sects and rival the unorthodox factions. Hearing this, Shin Gamyeong dismissed it as unrealistic and laughed at the bold claim. However, Beakley Woon did not back down. He explained that the reputation he spoke of was not for Dragon Hall itself, but for the alliance he intended to build. His seriousness caused Shin Gamyeong to stop laughing and regard him more carefully. He asked directly what Beakley Woon truly wanted in return. Beakley Woon stated his condition clearly. What he sought was access to Dragon Hall's future resources and support, specifically a disciple exchange to build long-term ties. After considering this, Shin Gamyeong agreed. He decided to send one of his disciples to the Righteous Heavens sect, noting that whether a genuine connection formed would depend on the disciple herself. Before departing, he issued a warning that if the sect ever acted against Dragon Hall's expectations, consequences would follow. His presence briefly carried an overwhelming pressure meant as a reminder of his authority. Beakley Woon met the pressure calmly, refusing to yield. The negotiation ended with mutual acknowledgement of the agreement. Shin Gamyeong then ordered his attendants to bring out brocades, presenting them as a deposit and reward for the day's dealings, insisting they not be refused. Beakley Woon accepted the gift after a brief calculation of its value, noting that it was substantial. Sayo also expressed quiet satisfaction at the outcome. After the meeting ended, Shin Gamyeong departed with his entourage. As he rode away, he reflected that Beakley Woon's confidence reminded him of his own younger days, though he still considered it reckless. He then ordered his carriage to head toward the unorthodox alliance to meet an old acquaintance. The next morning, Sayo presented Beakley Woon with a newly completed outfit. As he wore it, the system displayed improvements to merit, prestige, and influence. Beakley Woon examined the garment, noting its quality and comfort, and expressed satisfaction with the craftsmanship. Sayo responded with a pleased smile. At that moment, the system issued a reward notification for the successfully crafted outfit, offering several options including a high-tier unbinding manual, a high-tier talent elixir, and an option to unlock an innate trait. After considering the choices, Beakley Woon selected the innate trait unlock. The system confirmed the decision, stating that from that point onward, he would be able to unlock the traits of his disciples. She was 17 years old and possessed an extreme constitution with extraordinary martial potential. However, due to her long illness and inactivity, her physical condition had weakened significantly. Her listed traits included diligence, adversity, and responsibility. The system also warned that her inner power was still too weak to unlock any traits at the moment. Beakley Woon carefully read through the information while muttering each listed trait to himself in confusion. When he attempted to select one, the system explained that disciples first needed to grow stronger and level up before their traits could be unlocked. The explanation immediately irritated him, and he complained inwardly about the unfair restriction. As he stared at Sayoa while thinking deeply about it, she became visibly flustered under his gaze. Meanwhile, Beakley Woon silently decided that he would simply help her grow stronger as quickly as possible so her traits could eventually be unlocked. Without wasting time, he immediately announced that formal training would begin. The sudden declaration made Sayoa nervous. She began doubting herself, wondering whether someone with no martial arts experience could truly learn properly. She worried that she might disappoint him despite all the help he had already given her. Then she remembered the reassurance he had offered during their first meeting, when he calmly told her that everything would be fine as long as he could heal her. Remembering those words, Sayoa finally steadied herself and decided to trust him completely. She then nervously asked what martial art she would learn first. A short while later, she followed his instructions and assumed a training stance. Baek Lee-woon explained that the technique was the horse stance, a basic foundational exercise used to strengthen the body. Seeing such a simple exercise, Sayoa looked slightly disappointed and admitted she had expected something more impressive. Baek Lee-woon calmly explained that restoring her weakened body came before everything else. Right now, proper conditioning was far more important than flashy martial techniques. When Sayoa timidly asked how long she needed to maintain the stance, Baek Lee-woon casually replied that the goal was 30 minutes. Hearing that, she stared at him in disbelief. Ignoring her reaction, Baek Lee-woon immediately ordered the training to begin. Time slowly passed in silence, while Sayoa struggled to endure the exercise. Eventually, unable to hold back her doubts anymore, she quietly asked whether someone completely inexperienced like her could truly become a martial artist. Baek Lee-woon answered without hesitation. Of course she could. After all, an extreme Yin constitution was a body naturally capable of accumulating immense inner power. Baek Lee-woon explained that although an extreme Yin constitution naturally leaned toward Yin energy, everything would change once a Dantian fully formed. At that point, the accumulated energy could properly circulate and stabilize within the body. After explaining this to Sayoa, he quietly fell into thought. Someone born with an extreme Yin constitution could push Yin energy to extraordinary heights. To him, a disciple with such natural martial talent was an opportunity he absolutely could not overlook. At that moment, the system displayed another notification praising his judgment and informing him that his insight stat had increased. Before he could think further, loud noises suddenly came from outside. Moments later, Yiriang burst in while loudly calling for Baek Lee-woon. Without wasting time, he shoved a scroll into his hands and explained that it had come from White Sword's Sect. The moment Sayoa heard the name, she immediately reacted with anger, clearly remembering the incident from the previous day. Seeing her expression, Baek Lee-woon finally connected the situation to the group he had fought earlier. Curious, he opened the scroll and read its contents. The letter announced that White Sword Sect would soon hold a grand martial contest and formally invited the Righteous Heaven Sect to participate. Yiriang then explained the situation further. White Sword Sect was the dominant sect in the region, and its sect master was infamous for his harsh personality. According to rumors, he often used martial contests as excuses to pressure weaker sects or force smaller organizations into submission. Even Yiriang found the situation strange because White Sword Sect normally targeted sects with at least some reputation or influence. The Righteous Heaven Sect was still almost unknown. The moment he casually referred to the sect as insignificant, Baek Lee-woon, Sayoa, and Shu all immediately glared at him at the same time. Caught off guard, Yiriang quickly panicked and tried to explain that he meant no offense. Meanwhile, Baek Lee-woon remained calm while analyzing the invitation. From what Yiriang described, he concluded that White Sword Sect likely intended to pressure the newly established Righteous Heaven Sect before it could gain momentum. Instead of worrying, however, Baek Lee-woon actually found the situation interesting. To him, this could become the perfect chance to spread the name of the Righteous Heaven Sect. Unlike his relaxed attitude, Sayoa felt deeply anxious. She worried that with a sect consisting of only 2 people, she might only become a burden to him during the contest. Baek Lee-woon looked surprised by her concern and clarified that the participant would be the chief disciple, meaning she alone would represent the sect. Hearing that, Sayoa immediately steeled herself and declared that she would simply train even harder. A second later, the reality of what she had just agreed to finally hit her, and she shouted in disbelief after realizing she would truly be competing alone. From that day onward, Sayoa trained relentlessly from morning until night. By evening, she would collapse onto the floor, completely exhausted and struggling to breathe. Even while enduring the harsh training, she could not stop questioning Baek Lee-woon's methods. Throughout the day, he only made her practice the horse stance repeatedly, while endlessly repeating a simple downward sword strike that even children could imitate. With the Grand Martial Contest less than 2 weeks away, Sayoa became increasingly worried about what Baek Lee-woon was actually planning. Yet every time she remembered his calm expression and reassuring smile, telling her not to worry, she found herself regaining confidence. Eventually, unable to hold back her curiosity any longer, Sayoa forced herself back on her feet and decided she would directly ask Beakley Woon about his true intentions. Seeing lights still coming from Beakley Woon's room late at night, Sayoa felt relieved that he had not gone to sleep yet. As she quietly approached, she noticed something unexpected. Softly calling for the Sect Master, she soon realized that Beakley Woon was completely absorbed in talking to himself and had not noticed her standing there. In reality, he was complaining to the system while struggling to sew clothing by hand. Every few moments, the needle pricked his fingers, causing the system to repeatedly display messages mocking his self-inflicted injuries. By then, it had already announced the same warning more than 20 times. Annoyed by the constant notifications, Beakley Woon muttered for the system to stay quiet while continuing his work. At the same time, he worried that Sayoa might already be questioning the repetitive horse stance training. Even so, he remained focused on finishing the outfit he was making for her, secretly hoping she would like it. Watching the scene silently from outside, Sayoa quietly stepped away without letting him know she had seen everything. At that exact moment, the system informed Beakley Woon that Sayoa's responsibility trait was beginning to awaken, which caught him completely off guard. Soon, the day of the grand martial contest hosted by White Sword Sect finally arrived. The streets around the venue were crowded with noisy spectators and martial artists from many sections. Near the registration area, a young man chatted casually with Wong Pao about why the Sect Master had suddenly organized such a large contest instead of simply arranging a normal duel with the Righteous Heaven Sect. Wong Pao vaguely explained that rumors claimed members of White Sword Sect had recently been defeated. According to him, the contest was likely intended to remind smaller sects what would happen if they opposed White Sword Sect. Both men briefly recalled the humiliating image of their sect master being disgraced, which only deepened their resentment. The young man mocked the unknown sect for foolishly challenging people far beyond their level. At that moment, Sayoa and Beakley Woon approached the registration table. Sayoa politely asked where she should sign, and the young man immediately pointed it out while secretly staring at her appearance in surprise. He even wondered to himself whether the Righteous Heaven Sect recruited disciples based solely on looks because she was unexpectedly beautiful. Sayoa calmly wrote down her name while Beakley Woon stood quietly beside her. Neither of them offered any additional explanation before leaving the table. After they walked away, the young man quietly commented on how strange Sayoa's outfit looked. Although he tried saying it under his breath, both Sayoa and Beakley Woon still heard him clearly. Beakley Woon immediately looked embarrassed, while Sayoa covered her mouth to hide her laughter. Trying to ease the awkwardness, he nervously asked whether she truly liked the outfit. Sayoa honestly admitted that the stitching was somewhat clumsy, but she still genuinely liked it. Once all the participants had gathered, So Yoing stepped on the main platform and officially announced the opening of the White Sword Martial Contest. He declared that the event existed not only to strengthen ties between righteous sects, but also to serve as a stage for the younger generation of martial artists. To further excite the crowd, he revealed that a special reward had been prepared for the victor. With a signal from So Yoing, an attendant opened a treasure box beside the platform. The moment the contents became visible, the entire crowd reacted in shock. Inside was the little azure pill. The system immediately explained to Beakley Woon that the little azure pill was one of the rare spirit pills created by the Orthodox Pill Sect. It could strengthen the blood and chi while greatly assisting in the formation of a dantian. When So Yoing officially announced that the winner of the contest would receive the pill, excitement instantly spread through the crowd. Many people praised the White Sword Sect Master for his generosity. However, after stepping down from the platform, So Yoing's expression immediately darkened. When two disciples approached to report that the tournament brackets had been prepared, he coldly insulted them before revealing his true intention. In his mind, this contest was never about friendship or unity. He intended to use overwhelming power to crush the Righteous Heaven Sect publicly and ensure they never dared oppose White Sword Sect again. As his disciples listened to his cruel plans, they immediately obeyed without question. Soon, the crowd gathered around the arena as the third regional qualifying round of the contest was about to begin. At that moment, Sayoa was extremely nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she asked Beakley Woon whether she would truly be able to perform well. Beakley Woon calmly told her to remember everything she had gone through during training. Still uncertain, Sayoa reminded him that most of her training had only consisted of practicing the horse stance. Beakley Woon reassured her once again, telling her to trust the person who had trained her. He confidently explained that she had already become far stronger than before, even if she did not realize it herself yet. Although his answer sounded somewhat casual, Sayoa still chose to believe him. She steadied herself and resolved to do her absolute best no matter what happened. Gripping her sword tightly, she slowly stepped onto the arena. Meanwhile, Beakley Woon remained completely confident because he could already sense the tremendous hidden strength inside her body. Soon, the referee officially announced the beginning of the third qualifying round. Her opponent, Chung Sam, introduced himself as the third senior disciple of the Blue Moon Sect. Sayoa calmly responded by introducing herself as a disciple of the Righteous Heaven Sect. The moment Chung Sam looked at her properly, he immediately mocked her. To him, she looked like someone who had barely learned how to hold a sword. Rather than denying it, Sayoa honestly admitted that she had only trained for about a month. Hearing that, Chung Sam became even more arrogant and looked down on her completely. He could not understand how someone so inexperienced dared to stand in the arena. Then the referee signaled for the match to begin. The instant the command was given, Sayoa moved first before Chung Sam could even finish speaking. Remembering Beakley Woon's teachings, she attacked immediately with all her strength and drove her sword directly into Chung Sam's abdomen. The sudden strike caught him entirely off guard, leaving him unable to defend himself. With a cry of pain, Chung Sam was sent flying backward from a single blow. The entire arena fell silent in shock. Everything had happened so quickly that even the referee froze for a moment in disbelief. Around the arena, the spectators struggled to accept that the match had been decided by one clean strike. Meanwhile, Beakley Woon calmly reminded himself that he had told Sayoa to trust him. Recovering from the shock, the referee quickly declared Sayoa of the Righteous Heaven Sect as the winner. Hearing the result, Sayoa became visibly excited. Looking toward the stands, she saw Beakley Woon giving her a confident thumbs up. Watching her victory, Beakley Woon reflected on the true purpose of her training over the past 2 weeks. More than techniques, he had taught her the mentality required of a martial artist. Afterward, all of Sayoa's remaining matches progressed just as smoothly. Beakley Woon understood something most people overlooked. Striking with full force was actually difficult for beginners because inexperienced fighters usually hesitated out of fear of seriously injuring others. Sayoa, however, was different. Once she attacked, she committed fully without hesitation. Because of that mindset, nearly all of her matches ended in 1 or 2 swift surprise attacks before her opponents could properly react. After another victory, Sayoa happily rushed back to report her success to Beakley Woon. Standing below the arena, he quietly thought that she would likely advance through the main rounds without much trouble. Feeling relieved about her progress, he finally turned his attention toward the other arenas to observe the remaining competitors. At that moment, a referee loudly announced the entrance of a White Sword Sect disciple. The surrounding crowd immediately focused their attention on a nearby arena. There, Jing Guang from White Sword Sect was already overwhelming his opponent with relentless attacks. The other fighters struggled desperately just to keep up and repeatedly begged for a moment to recover. Jing Guang ignored him completely. Eventually, the battered opponent finally surrendered, admitting defeat outright. However, Jing Guang did not stop attacking even after the surrender. Perhaps because he had become too absorbed in the fight, a dangerous aura began rising from him as he prepared another strike. Realizing something was wrong, the defeated fighter screamed in fear and begged him to stop. Even so, Jing Guang still swung his sword down mercilessly and struck the man directly in the face. The referee immediately rushed forward and shouted for him to stop because the match had already ended, but it was already too late. The defeated fighter lost several teeth from the blow before collapsing unconscious onto the arena floor. The referee officially declared Jing Guang of the White Sword Sect as the winner. Hearing the result, Jing Guang only clicked his tongue in irritation, as though the outcome had still disappointed him. Watching from a distance, Beakley Woon silently judged him. The boy had already dominated the match from the beginning, yet still resorted to cruel and unnecessary attacks. To Beakley Woon, Jing Guang seemed like an especially unpleasant person. Not long afterward, Sayoa happily ran over and excitedly announced that she had successfully advanced into the main rounds. Beakley Woon immediately congratulated her, and Sayoa proudly explained that she had followed his instructions exactly, attacking with full commitment and winning far more easily than expected. Seeing her confidence grow, Beakley Woon quietly felt satisfied that his teaching methods had worked. However, while talking, Sayoa suddenly felt uncomfortable as she looked toward Jingguang. She could sense a heavy, killing intent coming from him, which made her uneasy. Curious about Beakley Woon's opinion, she asked him to predict how strong Jingguang truly was, since there was a high chance they would eventually face each other in the main rounds. Before he could answer, another voice interrupted them. Turning around, they discovered So Yoing standing behind them. The White Sword Sect master congratulated Sayoa for reaching the main rounds and casually brought up the previous conflict involving his disciples. Beakley Woon calmly responded that perhaps White Sword Sect needed stricter disciple training instead. Ignoring the remark, So Yoing casually patted Sayoa on the shoulder and praised her talent. However, he also remarked that her next opponent would likely be Wu Jie, implying that her journey in the tournament would probably end there. Then, with a smile hiding his true intentions, So Yoing suggested that Sayoa could always join White Sword Sect instead if she wished. The moment he attempted to recruit her openly, Beakley Woon brushed his hand away and stepped in front of Sayoa protectively. He thanked So Yoing for acknowledging her ability, while also commenting that White Sword Sect disciples certainly displayed some skill themselves. So Yoing's expression stiffened slightly at the subtle provocation. Soon after, he called for Wang Pao. Wang Pao quickly arrived and respectfully responded to his sect master summons. So Yoing then ordered him to escort Beakley Woon and Sayoa to their guest chambers. After receiving the order, Wang Pao politely introduced himself as a first-rank disciple of White Sword Sect and guided them toward the resting area. At that moment, the system displayed information about him to Beakley Woon. Wang Pao was 21 years old and possessed exceptional talent, particularly in quickly understanding and mastering martial techniques. As Wang Pao led them onward, Beakley Woon suddenly appeared beside him and casually praised his physique, foundation, and natural build. The unexpected compliment caught Wang Pao completely off guard. Embarrassed, he awkwardly thanked him while stiffening nervously under the attention. Eventually, Wang Pao showed them their assigned guest room and politely wished them a comfortable stay before leaving. The moment he was gone, Sayoa immediately tried bringing up concerns about her next opponent again. However, Beakley Woon suddenly changed the topic and asked what she thought about Wang Pao instead. He even casually suggested that Wang Pao might someday become her junior brother within the Righteous Heaven sect. The abrupt shift in conversation completely confused Sayoa. Meanwhile, elsewhere in White Sword Sect, memories from Wang Pao's past resurfaced. Years earlier, So Yoing had personally praised Wang Pao's physique, strength, and talent before accepting him as a disciple of White Sword Sect. At the time, Wang Pao had been overwhelmed with gratitude and admiration toward his sect master. Later, during a training session, Wang Pao was suddenly defeated by Jingguang, despite being 3 years older and more experienced. The surrounding disciples loudly praised Jingguang's overwhelming talent, while Wang Pao could only protest weakly that it had merely been training, and there had been no reason to attack so seriously. Watching the scene, So Yoing coldly turned away in disappointment, dismissing Wang Pao as nothing more than a weak disappointment. He reminded Wang Pao that his role was to dedicate himself entirely to supporting his junior brothers. Those harsh words deeply affected Wang Pao. Suddenly waking from sleep, Wang Pao realized he had been reliving those memories in a dream. Confused, he rubbed his eyes and wondered why such memories had resurfaced now. At that moment, Jingguang entered the room and greeted him casually, causing Wang Pao to look up in surprise. Wang Pao looked surprised to see Jingguang appear before him and immediately asked why he had come. Jingguang casually explained that he wanted to warm up before the upcoming matches. Already exhausted, Wang Pao apologized and admitted that he was not feeling well enough to continue training. Jingguang showed no concern at all. To him, Wang Pao's condition was irrelevant. What mattered was satisfying his own needs. He coldly mocked Wang Pao's large physique, saying that such a body should at least be useful during training. After Jingguang left, Wang Pao sat alone in silence, gloomily blaming himself once again. Time passed, and soon the day of the semifinals arrived. Before the match, Sayoa carefully discussed her opponent's swordsmanship with Beakley Woon. Wu Jie specialized in illusion sword techniques that made it difficult to predict where the real attack would come from. However, Sayoa also understood that illusion techniques relied heavily on finesse, meaning flaws would appear if the user failed to maintain precision. Beakley Woon then asked how one should deal with illusion swords. Sayoa answered that the key was avoiding deception. He agreed, but explained that, at her current level, there was actually a much simpler solution. He calmly outlined his strategy and instructed her to follow it exactly. Although confused at first, Sayoa eventually accepted his guidance after Beakley Woon confidently assured her that she would definitely win if she trusted him. Nearby, Yiriang remarked in surprise that Sayoa had already reached the semi-finals after training for only a month. He congratulated Beakley Woon for raising her this far so quickly. Clearly pleased with himself, Beakley Woon simply replied that congratulations could wait until after the finals, because he intended to win the entire tournament. Yiriang stared at him in disbelief and asked whether he was truly serious. Soon afterward, the semi-final match began. Standing in the arena, Wu Jai mocked Sayoa openly. He admitted she had advanced far, but insisted that luck alone could not carry her any further. According to him, everyone present expected her defeat. Sayoa answered confidently that at least one person believed in her victory completely, her Sect master. Wu Jai burst into laughter, calling both master and disciple equally crazy. The referee then officially started the match. Sayoa immediately rushed forward and declared that she would be today's victor. Wu Jai reacted instantly and skillfully blocked her first strike. Even while fighting, he remained arrogant and believed disciples of White Sword Sect existed on a completely different level from ordinary martial artists. Soon after, Wu Jai's illusion techniques began pressuring Sayoa heavily. Unable to tell which attacks were real and which were feints, she gradually became overwhelmed. Her expression slowly filled with panic as she struggled to follow his movements. Maintaining constant pressure, Wu Jai struck her again and sent her stumbling backward. When she managed to block another attack, he mockingly praised her before unveiling a new technique. As he moved, he scattered streams of strange purple liquid throughout the arena. The moment the liquid approached her, Sayoa remembered Beakley Woon's instructions. Illusion sword users were often weak in close combat, which meant Wu Jai would naturally try to maintain distance. Her goal was simple: close the gap and land even a single clean strike. With that thought in mind, Sayoa charged forward directly toward him. Wu Jai confidently manipulated the streams of purple liquid toward her while believing her movements were completely predictable. Even so, Sayoa forced herself onward and endured one of his attacks directly. Watching from the sidelines, both Yiriang and Beakley Woon observed the situation carefully. Yiriang looked tense, while Beakley Woon merely narrowed his eyes silently, his expression unreadable. Eventually, Sayoa collapsed onto the arena floor. Seeing her down, Wu Jai smugly declared himself the winner. He looked at her with both contempt and disappointment, believing she had finally reached her limit. However, while regulating her breathing on the ground, Sayoa suddenly shouted that the match was not over yet. To everyone's surprise, she rose back to her feet almost immediately. Wu Jai demanded to know what she still intended to do in her weakened state. At that moment, Sayoa suddenly felt her determination surge again. She dashed forward at incredible speed, while Wu Jai stood confidently, convinced he still had complete control of the match. Declaring that she would finish everything with one final move, Sayoa closed the distance instantly. Before anyone could properly react, Wu Jai was suddenly sent flying backward. Yiriang immediately shouted in excitement that they had won. However, some White Sword Sect disciples instantly protested, accusing Sayoa of pretending to be defeated before launching a surprise attack. They loudly claimed the victory was unfair. Beakley Woon calmly dismissed the complaints and questioned whether White Sword Sect intended to act so petty over a legitimate match. One disciple became so emotional that he even began challenging Beakley Woon directly, but So Yoing immediately stepped in and apologized for his disciple's disrespect toward another sect master. Beakley Woon accepted the apology calmly. Even then, So Yoing continued speaking, insisting that the true problem was that everyone had simply assumed Sayoa was already defeated before the match had actually ended. White Sword Sect ultimately acknowledged defeat in the semi-final duel, and the referee officially declared Sayoa of the Righteous Heaven Sect the winner while confirming the loss of the White Sword Sect disciple. Overjoyed, Sayoa immediately ran to Beakley Woon and excitedly announced her victory. Beakley Woon calmly praised her performance and joked that Yiriang would be paying for everyone's meal that night. Watching the scene from afar, Wang Pao quietly turned away and left in silence. As he passed by, So Yoing suddenly ordered him to secretly poison Sayoa's food so she would be paralyzed before tomorrow's final match. He also instructed Jingguang to completely destroy her during the duel, even if it meant crippling her arms and legs. Wang Pao hesitated at the order, unable to respond immediately. Seeing that hesitation, So Yoing slapped him across the face and angrily insulted him. According to him, if Wang Pao lacked talent, then the least he could do was learn to obey intelligently. He even mocked Wang Pao for being surpassed by his younger disciple. At that moment, Beakley Woon suddenly appeared nearby and sarcastically remarked that White Sword Sect certainly trained its disciples harshly. Hearing the comment, So Yoing stopped and coldly accused Beakley Woon of interfering in another sect's affairs. Beakley Woon calmly replied that regardless of the situation, treating a disciple so cruelly was excessive. So Yoing responded that even weak disciples were still the responsibility of their sect master and should be guided rather than abandoned. He then reminded Beakley Woon that this matter did not concern him and suggested he leave instead. Before the conversation could end, Wang Pao unexpectedly begged to be accepted into the Righteous Heaven sect instead. Both Beakley Woon and Wang Pao himself were shocked by the sudden statement. Beakley Woon explained that compared to White Sword Sect, the methods and atmosphere of the Righteous Heaven sect seemed far better suited for Wang Pao. The suggestion immediately angered So Yoing, who accused Wang Pao of already becoming attached to the opposing sect. Wang Pao desperately denied it, but So Yoing no longer cared. Instead, he proposed a wager. According to So Yoing, Sayoa possessed too much talent to remain in a small sect like the Righteous Heaven sect. He claimed that if she stayed there, her abilities would eventually go to waste. He then proposed that whichever sect lost the tournament final would hand over one disciple to the winning side. Beakley Woon accepted the wager without hesitation. Wang Pao immediately panicked and begged them to stop, but So Yoing ignored him completely. Before leaving, he coldly warned Beakley Woon to prepare for losing his only disciple soon. Afterward, Beakley Woon privately asked Wang Pao why he believed he had been chosen in the first place, and told him to think carefully about where he truly wanted to belong. Meanwhile, Sayoa also learned about the wager. Beakley Woon explained that having Wang Pao join them would likely make a good addition to the sect, and that leaving such talent wasted in White Sword Sect would be unfortunate. Even so, he gently asked Sayoa whether she believed she could truly win the final match. Sayoa hesitated slightly. She admitted she would do her best, though she remembered him previously saying the odds were only 50-50. Beakley Woon acknowledged that, but reassured her that he genuinely believed she could win. Seeing the confidence in his eyes, Sayoa gradually regained her own determination and promised to fight with everything she had. Elsewhere, So Yoing was also giving strict instructions to his disciples. He ordered them not to embarrass White Sword Sect again and demanded victory at all costs. The disciples loudly accepted the command. Wang Pao also quietly warned Jingguang not to underestimate Sayoa. Jingguang dismissed the warning confidently. According to him, he would never make the same mistakes as Wu Jai, and he believed Wang Pao was placing far too much faith in Sayoa's luck. He arrogantly declared that he would crush those hopes completely. Soon, the referee called both finalists into the arena. Even before the match began, Jingguang continued mocking Sayoa, admitting she had done well to reach the finals, but insisting that her luck would end there. Sayoa immediately answered back, saying no one yet knew who would truly fall in the arena. The referee then officially started the match. Jingguang initially assumed Sayoa would avoid direct confrontation and rely on surprise attacks again due to her apparent lack of experience. Instead, she immediately charged straight toward him head-on. To Jingguang's surprise, Sayoa landed a direct strike against him almost instantly. At that moment, Jingguang realized her inner power was far stronger than he had expected. Meanwhile, Sayoa remembered Beakley Woon's earlier advice. Her opponents naturally assumed her inner power was weak because she appeared inexperienced, but they failed to consider the overwhelming reserves granted by her extreme constitution. Knowing she would only get one true opportunity, Sayoa leaped high into the air and aimed for a decisive strike. However, Jingguang reacted quickly and narrowly avoided the attack. The moment he closed the distance, he countered with a powerful punch that sent Sayoa flying several meters away. Although he admitted her inner power was impressive, Jingguang still looked down on her as nothing more than an inexperienced novice. Without giving her time to recover, He launched a relentless barrage of attacks. As Sayoa struggled to block the assault, she realized just how strong Jing Guang truly was. Completely confident in his superiority, Jing Guang declared that he would finish the match within 10 seconds. Even under heavy pressure, Sayoa refused to retreat. She gripped her sword tightly and forced herself forward once again, determined not to lose the trust Beakley Woon had placed in her. At that critical moment, the system suddenly activated Sayoa's responsibility trait. Her three temperaments, balance, adversity, and responsibility, merged together with responsibility at the center. As a result, the inherited trait clear reflection like water was unlocked, greatly enhancing her judgment and awareness in extreme situations. Sensing an opportunity, Sayoa prepared to counterattack. However, Jing Guang immediately crushed her move and overwhelmed her before she could properly react. In the next instant, the weapon in her hands was knocked away and seized by Jing Guang himself. Confident that victory was finally secured, he praised her for enduring this long while questioning whether she could survive his next strike. Faced with the overwhelming attack rushing toward her, Sayoa could only stare in shock. Below the arena, Beakley Woon urgently called out to her. Right before the attack landed, Sayoa suddenly remembered the unwavering trust Beakley Woon had placed in her. At that moment, the hidden power inside her erupted violently. Dust exploded across the arena as a wave of cold energy burst outward, instantly sending Jing Guang flying several meters away. Watching the sudden reversal, both Beakley Woon and Yiriang could not hide their surprise. Even so, Yoing reacted in shock after recognizing the power as cold chi cultivation. Streams of cold chi now wrapped around Sayoa's arms, spreading freezing energy with every movement she made. Even she herself seemed surprised by the sudden chill surrounding her body. Realizing the match had effectively ended, Beakley Woon immediately climbed onto the arena platform, only to be stopped by the referee, who reminded him that outsiders could not interfere during a duel. Beakley Woon angrily pointed out that the outcome was already obvious. The referee hesitated briefly while looking at Jing Guang writhing on the ground in pain before finally announcing Sayoa as the winner. Hearing the result, both master and disciple looked at each other and smiled proudly. Meanwhile, So Yoing exploded with anger, furious that White Sword Sect had been humiliated again. Beakley Woon gently helped Sayoa stand and asked whether she was all right. Despite her exhaustion, she happily reminded him that she had kept her promise. Beakley Woon could only smile softly at her determination. Around them, the crowd began openly praising the fight and congratulating Sayoa for her victory. The referee then officially raised her hand and declared Sayoa of the Righteous Heaven Sect the champion of the White Sword Martial Contest. As the cheers continued, Beakley Woon took the opportunity to address the crowd personally. He formally announced that the Righteous Heaven Sect would hold its founding ceremony 1 month later and respectfully invited everyone present to attend the celebration. The spectators immediately reacted in surprise after realizing the sect had not even officially held its founding ceremony yet. The fact that White Sword Sect had lost to such a newly established sect shocked many people. Hearing the crowd's reactions only enraged So Yoing further. He accused Beakley Woon of using White Sword Sect's reputation to elevate the prestige of the Righteous Heaven Sect ceremony. He also accused him of deliberately concealing Sayoa's cold chi cultivation in order to deceive everyone. As So Yoing prepared to attack Beakley Woon directly, Wong Pao hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Furious, So Yoing demanded to know why Wong Pao was interfering. Wong Pao calmly warned him to preserve his dignity as a sect master. That response only made So Yoing even angrier. Declaring Wong Pao a traitor for defending the Righteous Heaven Sect, he immediately moved to attack him. At once, Beakley Woon stepped protectively in front of Wong Pao and confronted So Yoing directly. He firmly declared that Wong Pao now belonged to the Righteous Heaven Sect and warned So Yoing not to casually touch his disciple. Beakley Woon then calmly added that if So Yoing refused to accept the result of the duel, he would personally accept a challenge instead. Before anyone could react, Beakley Woon suddenly grabbed and twisted So Yoing's wrist, causing the White Sword Sect master to cry out in pain. He tried to pull his hand free and curse them, telling everyone to get out of his sight. Even then, he swore he would never forget his grudge against the Righteous Heaven Sect. When asked if he still held regrets, he admitted he did not, but wondered whether someone as useless as him could ever start over. Beakley Woon openly praised him, saying he was already an outstanding martial artist and that he would prove it himself. Hearing those words, Wang Pao remembered how others once mocked So Yo as a fool. Jing Wang also looked down on him, saying his older brother was all noise with no substance. Unable to hold back his emotions anymore, Wang Pao burst into tears. With newfound determination, he thanked Beak Li Woon and promised not to disappoint him. Soon after, Beak Li Woon stepped onto the stage and officially declared the duel finished. Yuri Yang mocked the situation, claiming Miss Iowa had won while Beak Li Woon took all the credit for himself. 2 weeks passed after the duel, and Wang Pao trained diligently within the territory of the Righteous Heaven Sect. Curious, he asked Iowa whether they practiced anything besides horse dance training. Delighted to hear him call her senior sister, Siowa proudly accepted the title and reminded him that the sect master valued strong fundamentals above all else. She encouraged Wang Pao to continue training patiently and not rush his growth if he wanted to become as capable as her. Confident in her own strength and stamina, Siowa then casually told him he could start carrying water on his own from now on. Wang Pao immediately realized that many chores were waiting ahead of him. Meanwhile, Beak Li Woon reflected on how accurate his judgment of people had been. Wang Pao possessed excellent analytical ability, a calm mindset, and the physical endurance needed to support his techniques. Not long after, Yuri Yang asked about the preparations for the founding ceremony. The response was that everything was progressing smoothly thanks to his support as an investor. Due to the publicity surrounding the duel, invitations for the ceremony had been flooding in. However, among them was a summons from the Murim Alliance, which immediately caught everyone off guard. Beak Li Woon stared silently at the scroll before finally burning it. The summons demanded an investigation into allegations that the Righteous Heaven Sect had copied the Beak Li clan's basic martial techniques. Yurong found the timing strange, especially since Beak Li Woon had left the clan 15 years ago. However, Beak Li Woon understood the situation clearly. The Beak Li clan's way was to exploit any weakness or opening they could find. Though the Righteous Heaven Sect's martial arts had been developed through 15 years of his own enlightenment and contained none of the Beak Li clan's techniques, the real issue was the Murim Alliance itself. If the investigators sided with the Beak Li clan, avoiding accusations of plagiarism would become extremely difficult. Losing the investigation would not only prevent the sect from passing down its martial arts, but would also force them to pay massive compensation. Worse still, even if another investigation were allowed later, the standards would become far stricter than before. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Yuri Yang turned and walked away with only one thought in mind. He was going to strike back. Beak Li Woon remained deep in thought, anticipating that the opposition would likely target the founding ceremony. To counter this, he decided they needed to gather basic martial techniques from other well-known sects to prevent any room for criticism or claims of plagiarism. The challenge now was identifying where to obtain such foundational techniques. At that moment, Sayo rushed in and informed him that guests had arrived. Beak Li Woon turned toward the entrance, where Namong Wu quietly remarked on the estate's ownership, calling it the property of a stingy old man. Chung Ha immediately warned him not to touch anything, threatening to throw him out. Beak Li Woon questioned their identity, and Namong Wu stepped forward, greeting him as the merchant group leader from before, now addressing him as the leader of the Righteous Heaven Sect. The remark drew laughter from him, while Beak Li Woon observed calmly, noting that the situation could potentially overturn the entire balance of power. Meanwhile, in the capital, discussions continued over the political implications of the Beak Li clan's influence. It was argued that if the Beak Li clan formally submitted a request through its strong connections, the Murim Alliance might not be able to oppose them. Concern grew that the situation could escalate, though Game dismissed hesitation and insisted the crisis was far more serious than previous disputes involving the White Sword sect. When asked about the difference in scale, he decided to send a letter requesting it be delivered immediately. The recipient questioned where it should go, and Yurong responded that instead of fearing both the Murim Alliance and the Beak Li clan, they should disrupt the situation by involving the Unorthodox Alliance. At the Beak Li clan, internal discussions intensified. The Outer Hall Master was criticized for interfering again, particularly regarding the investigation into alleged copying of basic techniques before the founding ceremony. Beak Li Changjiang defended his actions, stating it was not the head's sole decision. The Elder Council evaluated the heirs. The eldest son Sani was deemed lacking in martial insight and talent, while the younger San was considered highly talented but too hot-tempered, and also a daughter. The elder corrected that gender was not a restriction for inheritance within the clan. Beakley Changjiang was questioned about why Beakley Woon had been allowed to leave the clan despite being highly gifted in both character and intelligence. The council insisted he must be brought back so he would recognize his place within the Beakley clan. Beakley Changjiang accepted the responsibility, stating that while he had fulfilled his duties as a father, growth required adversity and exposure to external challenges. He instructed that Woon should be made to understand that he remained under the influence and responsibility of the Beakley clan. He firmly declared that he would personally bring Woon back. As time passed, the day of the Righteous Heaven Sect's founding ceremony arrived. Liu reassured others that no sect had ever escaped a basic technique plagiarism investigation. Beakley Changjiang, however, remained confident, insisting he was not worried and reaffirming his intention to bring Woon back. When questioned about his fixation on Woon, it was noted that although he was only one member of the clan, he held exceptional potential. It was even believed that if Woon had remained within the Beakley clan and continued training their arts, he could have become the greatest swordsman of the era. Still, Beakley Changjiang believed the clan needed him and intended to see how he would respond to their summons. At the ceremony, the drums echoed continuously as Beakley Woon stood prepared for the auspicious moment. A system alert briefly indicated his rising heart rate. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, leapt down, and thrust the ceremonial flag into the ground, marking the official founding of the sect. The impact sent dust and sand into the air as the dragon emblazoned banner rose and fluttered prominently in the wind. Addressing the gathered crowd and guests from afar, Beakley Woon formally introduced himself as the leader of the Righteous Heaven Sect. First, Beakley Woon addressed the gathering, stating that while he had many matters to share, one issue needed to be clarified before formally establishing the sect. He openly declared that the Righteous Heaven Sect had been accused of copying the Beakley clan's martial arts. The announcement left the audience confused, with many questioning whether this was an admission of guilt. Beakley Changjiang, however, reacted with growing interest, finding the situation more engaging than expected. Liu observed the situation and remarked that it seemed as though the Righteous Heaven Sect had already given up, though Beakley Changjiang interpreted the matter differently and began to suspect there was a deeper plan behind Woon's actions. At that moment, Woon called out, noting that the Murim Alliance investigation delegation was present and invited them to step forward. Beakley Changjiang responded by acknowledging the group, and the crowd within the Righteous Heaven Sect became visibly unsettled at his presence. Woon then formally requested a public investigation to verify the allegations of copying, conducted openly before 10,000 attendees. Beakley Changjiang immediately objected, arguing that such investigations required strict procedures and could not be publicly performed before a final verdict. Liu further emphasized that the venue, organized under the Murim Alliance, was meant for mediating disputes between sects rather than for enforcing accusations, as if it were a prosecution against the Righteous Heaven Sect. Internally, he reasoned that the alliance could not appear biased before the smaller and mid-sized sects that formed its foundation. When asked to proceed, Li Su agreed, and a demonstration began. He executed a technique identified as a core basic move of their sect, initiating it with a single kick that formed 3 visible force lines, drawing the attention of everyone present. Liu immediately claimed that the technique had been copied from the Beakley clan. Woon confirmed that it had been inspired by the triad concept of heaven, earth, and man. Beakley Changjiang acknowledged the resemblance and further noted that the same movement pattern also overlapped with techniques from the Naman clan. Following a direct assessment, it was revealed that all 23 foundational techniques of the Righteous Heaven Sect bore similarities to martial arts from various sections. Liu questioned whether the entire process was merely a fabricated demonstration, while Woon challenged him to specify what part he considered false. He further argued that since no representatives from the other sects were present to validate the claims, there was no authority to judge the matter conclusively. At that point, Namong Wu and Chengha both stepped forward, identifying themselves as representatives with knowledge of the respective sections. Namong Wu explained that he had been nearby and came after hearing about the founding ceremony. He confirmed that the similarities were undeniable, noting that their Namong techniques also followed a structure beginning from Earth, forming the human aspect and ultimately reaching toward heaven, reflecting the same conceptual framework. Chengha added further evidence by presenting additional materials, including confirmation letters from other sects raising similar concerns of imitation. He explained that if such claims were accepted, then the Beakley clan's techniques would also inevitably fall under similar scrutiny when compared with other sections. Beakley Changjiang objected again, insisting that the argument was still based on assumptions rather than proof. Namong Wu countered by pointing out that this was precisely the same reasoning the Beakley clan itself had used, treating structural similarity in concepts like heaven, earth, and man as evidence of copying. The leader of the Murim Alliance's investigation team scoffed, questioning whether they would truly resort to such sophistry. Beakley Changjiang immediately erupted in anger, demanding to know what he meant. Beakley Woon calmly observed the situation, appearing satisfied with how events were unfolding, while the elder shouted his name in frustration. Liu, meanwhile, questioned how such verification was even possible, asking whether they had distributed records of all basic techniques across sects in advance. The implication was confirmed, though Woon did not directly respond, instead stating that he had already presented his argument, and now it was the Moon Sword's turn to reply. Internally, he considered that if the Beakley clan were forced to admit their techniques had been copied, they could be implicated in claims involving 23 sections. He questioned whether the elder would truly accept such a risk. Beakley Changjiang, growing increasingly unsettled, asked if that was all. Suddenly, the elder drew his sword and launched an attack toward Beakley Woon. Namong Wu and Chungha shouted in alarm, but the Righteous Heaven Sect leader immediately ordered them to stop, declaring it a personal matter. Beakley Changjiang confronted Woon directly, reminding him that regardless of circumstances, he still carried Beakley blood and was meant to be the heir guiding the clan's future. He accused Woon of still being bound by unresolved ties and questioned whether he harbored resentment for failing to avenge his mother or protect her. He warned that if Woon intended to destroy the Beakley clan out of hatred, he would not allow it. As the confrontation escalated, Beakley Changjiang unleashed an attack that sent him tumbling back, while stabilizing himself by driving his sword into the ground to control the force. Woon responded calmly, stating that he did not deny his bloodline, and that claiming he held no hatred would be dishonest. However, he explained that he had grown more understanding over time. When asked why he did not return to the clan, he replied that as sect master, he needed to continue strengthening himself and was no longer the same person who had left the Beakley clan. Beakley Changjiang pressed further, questioning how long the Righteous Heaven Sect could withstand pressure if the Beakley clan decided to suppress them, implying the sect had no real chance against its influence. Before the confrontation could continue, Woon interrupted, asking if he truly intended to proceed right then and there. Beakley Changjiang paused, visibly shaken, as memories from the past surfaced, recalling when Woon was still a child who once confidently claimed he had already blocked one of his techniques. Those memories disrupted his resolve. Woon stepped forward and spoke as sect master, stating that the Righteous Heaven Sect's fundamentals and martial arts were not copied from any school. He also addressed Beakley Changjiang as a descendant of the Beakley clan, asking him to wait a little longer, promising that the truth would eventually become clear. Beakley Changjiang remained silent, consumed by conflicted thoughts. Eventually, he rose, turned away, and declared in the name of Moon Sword that the Righteous Heaven Sect had not copied the Beakley clan's martial arts. Without another word, he departed. Elsewhere, the leader of the Unorthodox Alliance remarked that he had considered intervening if things had worsened, but it was no longer necessary. He reflected that Woon's presence felt like a legendary weapon, remarkably rare and powerful. His companion urged him to quiet down, while another observer privately regarded Woon as something extraordinary and expressed curiosity about him. Meanwhile, in another location, Gao remained indifferent as she observed the situation, already considering Woon as a potential first trading partner. Days later, the aftermath revealed an unexpected issue. The sect remained empty. Sayoa expressed frustration that despite 3 days passing, not a single disciple had joined. Woon reassured her to remain calm and not be overly anxious. Sayoa then worried about how they would recruit disciples, and even suggested sending Wang Pao to handle recruitment. Hearing his name, Wang Pao panicked at the idea. Woon then instructed Sayoa to deliver a document to the Hawun merchant group, describing it as a recruitment method. When Sayoa opened it, she discovered it was an application for cooperation with the Murim Alliance. The scene then shifted to the residence of the 3 strategists of the Murim Alliance. He reported that disciples of the Mujiang Martial School had submitted a petition refusing the upcoming internship. Yeagle Piong asked for the reason, and was told that although graduation was approaching, the students considered the internship system unfair, claiming the assignment criteria had always been biased. Within the Murim Alliance, which includes institutions like Mujiang Martial School, Merwin Martial School, smaller sects without strict hierarchy, and major schools backed by prominent families, the situation had long been uneven. Yeagle Pyong noted that while Mujiang appeared disadvantaged on the surface, it still had orthodox trained disciples who had managed to hold their ground. However, the situation this time was different. The current generation of Manhwa disciples was unusually strong, and Mujiang had already suffered 3 consecutive years of losses, severely damaging morale. When asked again about the refusal, it was explained that they were still trying to convince the students, but even the schoolmaster seemed to tacitly accept their stance. Yeagle Pyong understood this, noting that prolonged suppression would naturally push anyone to try to restore confidence. At that moment, a carrier pigeon arrived with a letter. After reading it, Yeagle Pyong was instructed as deputy strategist to gather all martial trainees. The internship would proceed as planned, with an operation scheduled that night in the forest near Hulong County. Meanwhile, Xian Wang abruptly woke from a strange dream, sitting up and gasping as though unsettled. He briefly reflected with irritation, thinking about Miha. As he prepared to leave, Munchiok reminded him that it was not yet his turn for watch duty, but Wang replied that he could not sleep anyway. The conversation turned to the internship issue, with Wang admitting responsibility for encouraging the refusal. He worried it might be perceived as arrogance and result in their reassignment to train under an obscure sect. Munchio suggested confronting the sect master directly if dissatisfaction continued, but Wang cut the discussion short and ordered the shift change, telling them to rest. Elsewhere, Beakley Wu introduced himself as the sect master of the Righteous Heaven sect and announced the start of their entrance evaluation. He stated that the only requirement was to step across the sect's threshold. Xian Wang immediately ordered all Mujiang disciples to prepare for combat, and they surged forward in attack. Beakley One responded with a single calm push, easily dispersing them, leaving Wang coughing and struggling to recover. Munchio called out to him in concern, while Beakley One calmly noted that safety was only guaranteed once they managed to distance themselves from him. A report came in from the Ganu province near Mount Wuong, where someone asked for updates from the martial world. Naaman Wu explained that the martial hall's operations were currently split across 2 locations, and that a newly appeared sect had recently drawn attention, one that had never been heard of before. When asked about it, a man in front dismissed the concern entirely, stating that it didn't matter who they were. He speculated that the Merm Alliance might simply be attempting to restore balance, or perhaps an unknown master was behind the emergence. Beakley then intervened, stating that it made no difference. Regardless of who they were, victory would be his. In parallel, Beakley Woon's past was briefly recalled. Beakley San remembered the moment he had left without explanation, offering a cold apology before departing despite her shocked pleas. She had been left behind, unable to understand his decision. Even days later, she remained alone, still struggling with his sudden disappearance. Within the Mujiang Martial School, Beakley San, Beakley Woon's younger sister, resolved firmly that she would not forgive him until she understood why he abandoned the clan. Elsewhere, Beakley Woon intercepted an incoming attack and assessed Munchio's abilities, acknowledging that he was competent. A companion turned to check on Wang, asking if he was unharmed, while Beakley Woon casually asked for Munchio's name. Munchio responded carefully, questioning whether he was the sect leader of the Righteous Heaven sect and why he had attacked them. Beakley Woon explained that it was part of his evaluation method. Before teaching anyone, he needed to assess their level. When reminded that only one participant needed to reach the sect entrance to pass, he challenged the logic, stating that allowing those who failed basic assessment into further trials would be meaningless. He declared that he intended to break their confidence completely through successive defeats, leaving them unable to continue as a form of harsh training. Munchio tried to intervene, but Wu Gang stepped forward and blocked the attack, despite his heavy breathing and visible concern from others. Wu Gang then directly asked whether defeating Beakley Woon would count as passing the entrance exam. Beakley Woon agreed without hesitation and allowed them to proceed. As the group attacked, Beakley Woon effortlessly repelled them, each movement precise and overwhelming. He criticized their lack of resolve, mocking their earlier confidence and noting their hesitation under pressure. He dodged Wu Gang's attack with ease, praised his effort, and then struck back, pointing out that his movements lacked consistency compared to his earlier bravado. Another attacker suddenly attempted a surprise strike, but Beakley Woon countered instantly with his sword. The attacker, Dan Ryan, was shocked to find part of his hair cut in the exchange. Beakley Woon observed him calmly before shifting his attention to Munchio, noting his sharp judgment and experience in real combat. As panic spread among the remaining disciples, Beakley Woon tilted his head slightly to avoid another strike and prepared to counterattack again. Beakley Woon quickly recognized the flaw in their approach. They were not making proper use of their numerical advantage. He shifted his attention to Wu Gang for evaluation, pointing out that his movements were hesitant and questioning whether he was afraid of injuring him. From his assessment, Beakley Woon concluded internally that overall their abilities were not bad, with 3 individuals standing out in particular. He decided to further disrupt their coordination by provoking them. Coldly, he criticized them for falling into disarray upon facing a strong opponent, suggesting that their reputation for repeated failure was not unfounded. Wu Gang responded with a restrained objection, while Munchio immediately intervened, taking command of the situation. He instructed Wu Gang to take a defensive role, noting that although their opponents seemed overwhelming, he was still observing them rather than acting without structure. He then outlined a coordinated plan. They would create an opening together, with Dan Ryan assigned to deliver the finishing strike when the opportunity appeared. Encouraged, the group pressed forward again, but Beakley Woon dismissed their regained confidence as too late. Wu Gang charged in with his sword, but his attack was easily deflected, leaving his weapon lodged and himself thrown back by a counterattack. Seizing the moment, Dan Ryan and Munchio attempted a joint strike, which Beakley Woon identified as a coordinated effort but evaded with ease. He countered by grounding himself, then striking both of them away in a single motion before returning to a composed stance. He then reflected on the encounter, noting that what made fighting a master dangerous was their ability to exploit familiarity. Opponents became overconfident, believing he would not respond decisively. With that assessment, he effortlessly overpowered Wu Gang once again, sending him crashing back in pain. Observing their deteriorating condition, Beakley Woon remarked that he had expected more from them, at least some basic martial talent. He expressed disappointment, but reaffirmed that the rules of the test still applied. At that moment, he sensed a surge of killing intent and narrowly avoided a sudden attack with his sword. He became visibly energized, recognizing the technique as something familiar, the Great Disaster Sword. Intrigued, he pressed Wu Gang, asking whether he was risking everything just to pass the duel, and demanded to see his full capability. Suddenly, Wu Gang launched a rapid sequence of attacks from an unexpected angle, catching him off guard for the first time in the exchange. Beakley Woon, panting slightly, observed him closely and concluded that his talent was unusually strong. He laughed in response, while Wu Gang remained confused by his reaction. At the same time, a system notification indicated a significant increase in Beakley Woon's energy stat after a long period of stagnation. Amused and increasingly interested, he considered the possibility of recruiting Wu Gang. He then challenged him again, asking if that was truly all he could do. After the battle, Wu Gang abruptly woke from a deep sleep, disoriented and unsure of his surroundings. He questioned whether he was inside the Righteous Heaven Sect and realized he had pushed himself too far the previous day. When Jingguang entered the room and checked on him, Wu Gang remained dazed, even repeating his name as if trying to process what had happened. He then recalled the events of the previous night and grew alarmed, realizing he had used the Blood Sword Sect technique openly in front of the Righteous Heaven Sect. Fearing that he had been identified as a member of a demonic cult, he recognized that the situation had become extremely dangerous and admitted to himself that he had lost control in the heat of the moment. Wu Gang realized that if the situation continued to escalate, he would not only lose the duel with the Marwan Martial School, but also risk being accused of acting as a demonic spy. Uncertain of what to do, he fell into thought. Before leaving, Jingguang reminded him that assembly time was approaching and instructed him to head outside if he was awake. Wu Gang responded softly, indicating he understood, but remained unsettled by the situation. He began questioning what he had witnessed earlier. Either Jingguang had not noticed anything unusual, or he had been wrong in assuming the Righteous Heaven Sect had already detected him. However, he quickly dismissed that possibility. The sect leader had clearly noticed him. The expression Beakley Woon gave him, along with his mention of the Great Disaster Sword, and his master, confirmed it. If he truly wanted, Wu Gang believed he could have already exposed him as a demonic spy. That raised a deeper concern. Why had he not informed the others? What was he planning? At that moment, Beakley Woon appeared and fixed his gaze on Wu Gang before smiling ominously and stating that he had arrived. This shocked Wu Gang, who felt as though everything was unfolding under his control. Beakley Woon then announced that out of the original 15 participants, only 5 remained after the preliminary round, which exceeded his expectations. The others reacted in shock, realizing how quickly the numbers had dropped. He then revealed the next phase. Over the following 15 days, they would engage in daily battles against disciples of the Righteous Heaven Sect, while spending the remaining time studying techniques. Sayo was instructed to distribute training weapons and equipment to everyone, which she promptly did, confirming each participant's preferred weapon and handing out gear accordingly. When she finished, she formally introduced herself as Sayo and explained that she would be assisting with their sparring sessions. Beek Lee-woon then instructed the group to greet each other properly and maintain basic courtesy. One participant, Wang Pa, introduced himself briefly. Beek Lee-woon acknowledged the exchange but quickly redirected the focus, stating that excessive conversation would waste time and that they should begin the matches immediately. Sayo agreed and suggested an unusual format, 5 versus 2, to save time. The group reacted in confusion at the proposal, but Beek Lee-woon accepted it without hesitation, further surprising everyone. Wu Gang observed the situation in disbelief, while Munchio expressed dissatisfaction, insisting they were being underestimated. He declared his intent to end the fight quickly and immediately launched forward, confident in his ability despite their previous losses against the Mujiang Martial School. However, Sayo effortlessly evaded his attack. Munchio attempted to continue pressing the offensive, gathering strength for a decisive strike with his wooden spear, believing it would finish the encounter. At that moment, a system notification confirmed the activation of a unique trait related to Mingjang. As Munchio struck, he was shocked to see an unnatural effect, his spear becoming covered in snow-like energy. Sayo calmly smiled and warned him that it would sting, then countered decisively, sending him flying with controlled force. Wu Gang watched in stunned silence, calling out Munchio's name in disbelief. Sayo then stated that it was her turn and ordered them to attack together. Wu Gang immediately rushed forward, throwing a punch with full force. Sayo acknowledged his technique, noting the quality of his defensive stance and the discipline behind his training. Hearing this, she briefly showed appreciation and even thanked him for the compliment, momentarily softening the tension of the fight. The exchange intensified as the battle continued. Wu Gang gathered his strength and warned that his next move would be difficult to counter. In response, Sayo was briefly startled when Wang Pao suddenly moved in to intercept Jingguang's attack, stepping in to support the engagement. Wang Pao, identified as a junior disciple, quickly gained the upper hand in the exchange and created an opening to counterattack. However, as he pressed forward, his movement was disrupted when his arm was suddenly restrained. At the same time, Dan Ryan and the others regrouped and declared that they would now fight seriously, forming a coordinated formation and surrounding Wang Pao. Despite being attacked from all sides, Wang Pao managed to block and redirect their strikes, realizing that the group was actively intercepting and adapting to each of their movements. Observing this, Wu Gang gritted his teeth in frustration, reflecting bitterly that even after 3 years of losses to the Mujiang Martial School, they were still struggling against members of an unknown sect. Beek Lee-woon quietly observed the battlefield as a rope suddenly shot toward Wang Pao's hand. Sayo reacted in alarm, but Wang Pao let out a brief cry as Dan Ryan was caught off guard, unable to understand what was happening. In the chaos, Wang Pao used the rope to pull and launch Dan Ryan forward with overwhelming force, sending him crashing into Wu Gang and knocking him back. Assessing the situation, Sayo concluded that only one opponent remained and stated that the outcome was effectively decided. The remaining participants stood frozen without making a move. When Sayo asked if he intended to continue, the atmosphere shifted as the opposing side realized they had been reduced to a single standing member. Beek Lee-woon, watching the conclusion, showed quiet satisfaction. The result confirmed his expectations. He then revealed that Sayo had only been formally training in martial arts for about 2 months, a fact that shocked everyone present. Wu Gang stood in disbelief, trying to understand how someone with such limited training could possess such refined strength and coordination. Beek Lee-woon then shifted the focus of instruction, explaining that future training would emphasize multi-person coordination techniques. Drawing from his experience in the Merm Alliance, he emphasized that coordinated group tactics were essential for victory, especially for those who had repeatedly lost to the Marwan Martial School over the past 3 years. He urged them to build trust in one another, stating that confidence in teammates would strengthen both coordination and individual ability. With that, he concluded the first training session and instructed everyone to rest. The group responded in unison with acknowledgement. Before dismissing them, Beek Lee-woon called Wu Gang aside and ordered him to stay behind. Wu Gang complied. Elsewhere, Wang Pao and another disciple exchanged polite remarks, with Wang Pao modestly downplaying praise for his abilities. As time passed within the Mujiang martial school grounds, a system notification activated a silence mode, isolating the area from outside sound. Noticing this, Beakley Woon acknowledged the perceptiveness of the system and shifted the conversation to a new topic. Standing opposite Wu Gang, he directly questioned him about the involvement of the Bloodsword Sect and the presence of the demonic cult's young sect leader within the Mujiang martial school. He warned that if no satisfactory explanation was given, consequences would follow. Wu Gang immediately became more guarded and considered escaping, but Beakley Woon abruptly launched an attack, cutting off that thought. He coldly stated that escape was not an option and repeated his demand for answers. As pressure mounted, Wu Gang's memories began to surface, pulling him back to earlier events. At the Bloodsword Sect the previous year, a cold voice had questioned Wu Gang about whether he had broken the arm of someone who was no longer able to resist. He had been ordered to stand, but he gave no reply. The Great Disaster Sword's voice then turned furious, criticizing his hesitation and demanding why he had not gone further, why he had not killed or at least crippled the opponents so thoroughly that they could never return to conflict. He reminded Wu Gang that as the young sect leader of his sect, his position within the orthodox martial world should already command fear, yet he continued to fall short of expectations. The pressure escalated further when he was ordered to kill his senior sister. Wu Gang was stunned and demanded clarification, but he was cut off immediately. The explanation given was cold and absolute. In the logic of the dark path, hesitation only leads to mass casualties. His compassion was framed as a fatal weakness. He was told that if he disobeyed, not only would his senior sister be killed, but so would everyone around him, and he himself would eventually be forced to inherit the Bloodsword Sect after killing his master. Left with no real choice, Wu Gang reluctantly accepted the order outwardly, declaring obedience and agreeing to infiltrate the Merm Alliance as a spy and eliminate his senior sister. Internally, however, he planned to delay and escape the moment he left his master's presence. In reality, Wu Gang suddenly snapped back to the present and shouted as he attempted to break through Beakley Woon's position. Beakley Woon observed his decision and noted that while his judgment of opponents was still immature, it was not entirely wrong. He acknowledged the attempt and urged him to reveal his true strength. Beakley Woon then engaged him directly, explaining that he had come for training and that orthodox martial arts alone would not allow Wu Gang to reach his full potential. He insisted that only by exposing his real abilities could Wu Gang prepare for future conflict, including the upcoming battle with the Mujiang Martial School. Wu Gang defended himself while struggling under the pressure of the exchange, realizing how different this situation was compared to the earlier entrance test. As he narrowly avoided strikes and tried to respond, Beakley Woon calmly evaluated his movements, noting that while his orthodox techniques were clumsy, they were still more useful than expected. However, he also stated that Wu Gang was fundamentally unsuited to unorthodox martial styles. This provoked Wu Gang, who demanded clarification. Beakley Woon responded that he was not suited for the killing sword, a style that required absolute willingness to eliminate everything in its path. Hearing this, Wu Gang recalled fragments of his past and grew more agitated, insisting that Beakley Woon knew nothing about him. Beakley Woon pointed out directly that Wu Gang's sword contained hesitation, identifying a lack of killing intent as his core weakness. Wu Gang pushed back, questioning how he could judge him so easily, but Beakley Woon answered with a strike, sending him flying. As Wu Gang struggled to recover, Beakley Woon pressed further, questioning what principle he actually followed. Wu Gang, frustrated and shaken, insisted that it was all or nothing and dismissed the idea of any deeper principle. Beakley Woon continued his pressure, stepping forward and attacking while asking why Wu Gang even held a sword. Wu Gang tried to respond, but was interrupted by another attack. Their blows collided with tremendous force, tearing into the ground and leaving visible damage across the battlefield. Finally, Wu Gang was forced down to his knees, struggling under the overwhelming difference in strength. At that moment, Wu Gang admitted there was a deeper reason behind his need to grow stronger. His thoughts returned to his father, an ordinary martial artist who nonetheless kept his word on the battlefield. When others retreated, he had been the only one to stand his ground. Even if the world dismissed it as a meaningless death, Wu Gang remembered it with unresolved anger, convinced his father had died unjustly. That lingering grief had nearly driven him to the edge. Yet he now realized that acting recklessly would only lead to a pointless death of his own. He understood that if he wanted anything to change, he had to survive and become stronger, enduring everything in the process. However, the path he chose had gone beyond his original intent. In pursuit of power, he had unknowingly become entangled in the identity of the Blood Sword Sect's young sect leader, no longer the young Master Wu Gang he once was. Beakley Woon fell silent after hearing this, and then asked whether he regretted the past. Wu Gang hesitated before admitting he did not know. What he did know was that he wanted to restore his father's honor and prove that his death was not cowardice, but the act of a warrior greater than most. As a son and heir to that legacy, he felt responsible, yet also lost in his current path. He even offered to accept punishment or exposure to the Merm Alliance, insisting that the others were uninvolved and that he alone had hidden his identity to infiltrate. After hearing this, Beakley Woon reacted unexpectedly, striking him and sending him flying before ordering him to stand. He remarked that Wu Gang reminded him of a boy lost in hatred. The conversation then shifted as Beakley Woon casually mentioned his own past, noting that when he left the Beakley clan to join the Mujeong martial school, he had already begun reshaping martial methods beyond traditional clan techniques. He explained that while others focused on strengthening their foundations, he specialized in adjusting and refining martial systems themselves. Wu Gang, surprised, asked if that meant he intended to teach him. Beakley Woon responded indifferently that the Merm Alliance would not collapse just because they ignored someone like him. Internally, however, he was clearly intrigued, recognizing Wu Gang as a potential successor connected to a powerful legacy. He then declared seriously that over the next half-month, he would completely dismantle Wu Gang's existing martial foundation and rebuild it from the ground up, warning that he would have to forget his current self and endure significant pain. He asked whether Wu Gang trusted him enough to accept that path. Wu Gang hesitated, questioning whether he could truly become stronger through this method. Beakley Woon reassured him that this was his role. Elsewhere, the scene shifted to a Merm Alliance envoy, where reports circulated that the students from the Martial Aptitude Hall this year were exceptionally talented. Yeagle Pyong confirmed the information, noting that their results were unusually high. As a result, major leaders within the martial factions had already begun an underground competition to recruit and secure them. Sword Saint Ouija Hack, one of the top masters among the orthodox martial arts 10 Heavens, mentioned a sudden development regarding a wager proposed by the co-leader of the unorthodox Merm faction concerning the upcoming duel. The bet was placed on Mujeong Martial School's victory. According to the terms, if the co-leader wins, he would request a minor favor. If he loses, he would halt all expansion and offensive actions for 1 year. His method of judgment, described as betting with an eye, was questioned by others as arrogance, suggesting he believed he could see outcomes others could not. Despite skepticism, the offer was considered too valuable to refuse given the current disadvantage. If the opposing faction paused their aggression, it would provide time for the orthodox side to reorganize its forces. Determined to maximize advantage, it was decided that Mujeong Martial School must not lose this duel under any circumstances. A new referee was assigned, a senior graduate from Merwin Martial School, along with Chung Ryu, a rising prodigy recognized as one of the next-generation swordsmen of Wong's sect. Elsewhere, Chung Ryu heard mention of Mujeong Martial School and recalled its reputation, noting it had been some time since he last encountered anything significant from it. Meanwhile, within Mujeong Martial School, Beakley Woon oversaw training sessions where disciples expressed exhaustion from continuous sparring, especially in uneven matchups such as 2 against 5. Sayo also commented on the difficulty of the training, but Beakley Woon soon arrived and acknowledged their fatigue. When Sayo noticed him, she asked when he had arrived. He responded calmly and announced a reward. After training concluded, they would travel to observe the upcoming duel at the Merm Alliance. He further revealed that a nearby blacksmith, previously associated with him, would forge personalized weapons for the disciples if they managed to win more than 8 out of 15 sparring matches against Mujeong Martial School's trainees. Sayo reacted enthusiastically upon hearing this and immediately accepted the challenge. Later, during sparring discussions, Dan Ryan expressed confusion over how Sayo had already adapted to counter techniques they had only recently encountered. She calmly stated that earlier forms had been more difficult, implying rapid learning progress. Wang Pao also noted that Sayo appeared to read opponents unusually well, while attributing his own improvement to increased motivation. Beakley Woon then issued further instructions, explaining that rewards and expectations were tied to performance. Observing the disciples closely, He urged them to analyze one another's growth and understand the reasoning behind his training methods. He also intervened when Wu Gang attempted to act independently, restraining him with a binding rope designed to suppress violent prisoners without damaging their core energy. The restraint tightened whenever unorthodox martial energy or uncontrolled movement was used, though it could theoretically be broken through disciplined physical strength alone. Wu Gang reacted in frustration, while others questioned whether Beakley Woon was showing favoritism towards certain disciples. He denied the claim and instructed everyone to continue sparring without distraction. Beakley Woon then explained that Wu Gang was being restricted specifically so he would not interfere and could instead observe the training process. From a distance, Munchio and others continued intense sparring sessions, visibly improving through real-time adaptation. Beakley Woon observed that previous weaknesses, such as failure to control spear distance, were being corrected through improved footwork and responsiveness. Wu Gang, watching in disbelief, noted how quickly his peers had evolved, especially in developing new close-range adaptations that had not existed before. Sayo also questioned a sudden movement during combat, unsure whether it was intentional or an instinctive adjustment. Beakley Woon, observing all of this, asked Wu Gang whether he could see how much the others had matured in such a short time. He then remarked that Wu Gang likely wanted to draw his sword and join immediately, but was afraid of being left behind. At that moment, a system notification confirmed that Munchio had entered the spear body unification state, where his spear and body movement became synchronized, as if the weapon were an extension of himself. Munchio planted his spear firmly, entering a heightened combat state that marked a significant breakthrough in his martial development. He then began to execute martial techniques in earnest, struggling against the restrictions placed on him. Wu Gang finally asked to have the bindings loosened, insisting that he could not improve while being forced to stand still. Beakley Woon rejected the request, stating coldly that movement at this stage would prevent real change. He explained that while Munchio was gradually forming his own martial path through accumulated combat experience, Wu Gang was still imitating Bloodsword Sect techniques and even echoing his senior sister's style, which kept him bound to his past. Cornered, Wu Gang asked what he was expected to do instead. Beakley Woon responded that as long as he continued letting his body follow inherited techniques, he would never break his established habits. The purpose of the restriction, he explained, was precisely to force that change. He then focused on Wu Gang's internal condition, analyzing that if physical movement could not correct his habits, the issue lay in how his internal energy circulated. Wu Gang suddenly understood and mentioned the concept of bloodline-related cultivation. Beakley Woon confirmed his reasoning and explained further. He stated that while other disciples were experimenting with new fist forms to break out of old patterns, Wu Gang needed to go further by completely reconstructing his internal foundation. He explained that although humans possess 365 acupoints, martial artists typically utilize only a fraction of them, and Wu Gang would need to find his path among the unused points. Wu Gang internally deduced the process, opening new acupoints, channeling internal energy through them, and forcibly overcoming resistance from established circulation routes. However, the system soon detected instability. His internal energy had been invaded by impurities and began flowing in reverse, indicating severe risk. Beakley Woon immediately warned him not to rush, explaining that forcing the process could result in loss of his dantian if the unstable energy consumed him. Observing nearby, Munchio reacted in confusion, questioning the nature of such extreme cultivation methods. Wu Gang endured intense pain, but Beakley Woon ordered others not to interfere, stating that this was something Wu Gang had to resolve himself. Wu Gang steadied his thoughts, refusing to abandon the process, determined not to return to his past state. He focused on purging the corrupted energy and forcing circulation through the new pathways. A system notification confirmed that his internal circulation had entered a micro-heavenly cycle. He let out a strained cry before gradually stabilizing. After some time, he finally calmed, breathing heavily as he recovered. Concerned, someone asked if he was all right. At that moment, the pressure within him suddenly surged, breaking the binding restraint. Beakley Woon, observing the result with satisfaction, stepped forward and confirmed that Wu Gang had successfully removed the influence of Bloodsword Sect techniques. He described him as a blank slate now. Wu Gang acknowledged this and requested further instruction, insisting that he could not be left behind and needed guidance to form a new path. Beakley Woon agreed, stating that he would shape that blank slate into a new sword path and lead him back to the training ground. The surrounding disciples reacted with excitement at Wu Gang's return to the group. Elsewhere, in a forested area, investigators discovered a corpse drained of blood. Namong Wu examined the scene and noted the body had been completely bled out. Chung Ha, visibly frustrated, ordered him to stop speaking and pointed out the neck wound and evidence that the body had been suspended during the process, suggesting a deliberate method. She noted regret that the culprit had escaped again. Namong Wu analyzed further, observing that the victims shared no clear pattern, suggesting the attacker consumed blood indiscriminately. He added that the method was too disorganized to be attributed to a cult or demonic sect, instead suggesting it might be a sadistic serial killer or even a monster. He noted that while the damage was not on the scale of a great demon, the lack of traces suggested intelligence. He then proposed either retreating to request reinforcements or continuing the pursuit. Chung Ha firmly rejected withdrawal, insisting they could not allow further casualties and speculating that higher-ranking authorities would likely pursue the case as well. When asked for objections, Namong Wu agreed to proceed under orders. He then half-jokingly considered the likelihood of death in such missions and even suggested preparing insurance. Finally, he carved a message into a tree, stating that if he went missing for more than a month, others should contact the Sect master of the Righteous Heaven Sect. Beakley Woon briefly muttered to himself, sensing an uneasy premonition that trouble was approaching. Sometime later, he stood at the gate of the training hall and addressed the disciples, acknowledging their 2 weeks of intense training. He praised their progress, noting that most of them had clearly improved, though he pointed out that one among them still had not discovered his own sword path. He confirmed that Sayo and Wang Pao had each achieved 8 victories as promised, and therefore the group would proceed to the next phase, including the forging of personalized renowned weapons. He reminded them that they had every reason to take pride in their results and express confidence that they could complete the next stage successfully. He then revealed the second training phase in blunt terms. They would fight and refine themselves through direct combat against one another. Elsewhere, Beakley Woon reviewed a report from the Merm Alliance deputy strategist, learning that the number of missing persons in Hunan had recently surged. The opposing official explained that many of the recovered victims had their throats slit and their bodies completely drained of blood, with most being civilians traveling alone. Based on the findings, Beakley Woon concluded that a murderous demon was likely responsible. He asked how the Merm Alliance was responding. The report stated that elite young operatives had already been dispatched to Hunan, including Namong Wu and Master Chung Ha, while the Tiger Squad had been assigned to the hub province. Hearing this, Beakley Woon judged that the situation was being handled by capable individuals and felt reassured, noting their skill levels and adaptability. However, the mention of demonic activity triggered an unpleasant memory. He then abruptly asked when the situation would be disclosed to the Manhwa Martial School disciples. At that moment, a sudden commotion erupted nearby. Jin Guang was struck and thrown into a room, injured, while Wu Gang was seen engaged in a heated clash elsewhere, leading to confusion and disorder among the disciples. Beakley Woon, noticing the chaos, asked if everything was all right and was told that the situation was under control, though clearly tense. Frustrated, he criticized the disciples for causing embarrassment in front of guests. Yurong expressed concern about whether it was safe to leave things as they were, and the conversation shifted to the status of training at Manhwa Martial School. It was mentioned that the legendary fighter Chung Ryu had reappeared and was reportedly involved in training the next generation. Beakley Woon was visibly surprised, recognizing Chung Ryu as a top-tier genius of the next generation and one of the closest contenders for the title of the strongest martial artist. He reflected that such a person should not naturally excel at teaching, making Manhwa Martial School's current development even more unexpected. He then remarked on their apparent abundance of talent, drawing further attention from those present. Outside, Wu Jin apologized for the earlier disruption, taking responsibility for their shortcomings. Beakley Woon reassured him, stating that despite the chaos, the disciples had performed better than expected over the past month. However, when Dan Ryan immediately resumed training instead of resting, Beakley Woon snapped and ordered everyone to stop and listen properly. He then clarified his past, revealing that during his time at Manhwa Martial School, he had repeatedly faced Chung Ryu in tournament finals and had never once been defeated. This revelation shocked those listening. When asked directly about his identity, he confirmed that in the past he was known as the White Sword Dragon, a title he earned before leaving his master more than a decade ago. He dismissed it as history, stating that he was now simply the sect leader of the Righteous Heaven Sect. Realizing that the disciples had been doubting him, He then firmly reminded them that everyone had performed well over the past month and suggested they were overdue for a short rest. Even so, Dan Ryan immediately insisted on continuing training. Frustrated, Beakley Woon raised his voice and ordered everyone to stop being stubborn and listen. Finally, the group settled down and began to properly follow his instructions. At this moment, Munchio stared at his own palm in confusion. He told the Sect Master that no matter how intensely they trained, they recovered unusually fast by the next day, and their injuries healed far quicker than normal. Beakley Woon considered this and realized it was due to their inclusion on the temporary disciple roster, which granted enhanced recovery effects. Even so, he reminded them that rest was still necessary, especially to prevent mental fatigue, which could be just as damaging as physical exhaustion. He ordered them to rest properly for the day, adding that visiting Yuyong's daunting lake would also be a rare opportunity for martial artists. The disciples quickly complied. Beakley Woon then added a final warning. Although the arrangement was temporary, they were currently considered members of the Righteous Heaven Sect. If they caused trouble outside, he would personally force them to crawl back to the Merm Alliance to report to him once training concluded. The group immediately assured him they would behave. Excited by the break, they prepared for the trip, with some expressing regret that Wang Pao could not join them. Munchio organized the group, suggesting they first visit Daunting Lake's most famous locations before enjoying food together. However, when they arrived at a restaurant, they were informed that it was fully occupied on the first and second floors, while the third floor was reserved for distinguished figures of the region. Unable to afford or access it, Munchio quickly pulled the others away, insisting they find another place and avoid unnecessary spending. At that moment, a woman named Gall approached and offered to pay for their meal on one condition: that they tell her about the person currently training the young disciples here. She removed her hat as she addressed Beakley Woon directly. Wu Gang, observing her, quietly wondered who she was, noting her striking appearance and blue eyes, while recalling fragmented memories connected to her name. Meanwhile, Gall reflected on her own past. She remembered being told that she would be introduced to an interesting opponent and initially dismissed it as exaggeration. She had heard warnings about the sect's unpredictable nature, but still felt compelled to meet the person responsible for the Righteous Heaven Sect's current reputation. She had even planned to establish a fabric shop locally as a cover while searching for him, confident in her own skills. Returning to the present, she expressed surprise that she had not yet been contacted despite her efforts. Orion tried to defuse the situation by pouring her a drink and jokingly addressing her as sister, which slightly softened the atmosphere. Munchio added cautiously that they had initially suspected she might be associated with the Unorthodox Alliance due to her sudden inquiry about the Sect Master. Gall accepted the misunderstanding calmly, noting that her appearance often led to suspicion. Munchio quickly apologized for the assumption. She then questioned whether the Righteous Heaven Sect Master had ever mentioned her. The group hesitated, unsure how to respond, until Wu Gang bluntly suggested that he might have simply forgotten. This caused visible embarrassment, prompting Wu Jin to quickly cover his mouth. Wu Gang clarified that the Sect Master was likely too busy with training and responsibilities rather than intentionally ignoring her. He explained that current pressures, including preparation for the wager with the Unorthodox Alliance, had likely left little room for personal matters. Gall acknowledged this explanation, noting that the bet between the Orthodox and Unorthodox alliances before the Grand Tournament had led to a temporary suspension of conflicts, with both sides wagering on their ability to evaluate people. The group reacted in surprise upon hearing this, realizing the situation carried far greater political weight than they had assumed. In the wager, it was revealed that the Unorthodox Alliance had bet on Mujiang Martial School's victory, while the Merm Alliance had placed their support behind Marwan Martial School. Hearing this, Wu Gang slammed the table in anger, insisting that a grand tournament should not be manipulated by outside forces and that it was not something the Unorthodox Alliance should interfere with. Gall continued explaining the terms of the bet. If the Unorthodox Alliance lost, they would halt all attacks and territorial expansion for 1 year. In return, if they won, the Merm Alliance would only need to fulfill a single small request. Because of this imbalance and consequences, the Merm Alliance had no real choice but to accept. However, the result was that both sides now quietly hoped for different outcomes, and the participants of the tournament had effectively been turned into pieces in a larger political game controlled by the Unorthodox faction. Upon hearing this, Munchio became furious, accusing the higher authorities of treating them as expendable pawns. Others expressed similar anger, believing they had entered the tournament on equal terms, only to realize they were being used in a broader scheme. Some argued that since they belonged to sects under the Merm Alliance, even a loss would not damage their personal honor and might even bring compensation. However, Gall challenged this view, pointing out that such thinking ignored those who actually had something to lose. She emphasized that for people like them, there was no option to simply accept defeat. They had a fight to win. Munchio bluntly agreed with her assessment, while tempers flared. Wu Gang suddenly struck the table, cutting off the argument and demanding that they stop. He then questioned what the sect master truly intended, suggesting that Beakley Woon likely already knew about the wager and was acting with a deeper plan in mind. Elsewhere, two individuals discussed the growing tension, speculating that the Merm Alliance would continue to face mounting pressure. Beakley Woon, however, remained calm and stated that he had no intention of following the expectations of higher authorities. He declared that anyone who came to him would be treated as his disciple, implying he would act independently of their schemes. When asked whether this would amount to open resistance against the Merm Alliance, he casually asked for assistance. But Yang immediately refused, stating that opposing the Merm Alliance was too risky and not in his interest. He suggested that if persuasion was needed, it should be directed towards someone else in the group. Beakley Woon calmly remarked that the other party was not exactly hiding anything and questioned when he had realized the situation. The conversation was interrupted when a messenger arrived, reporting urgent news from the Righteous Heaven Sect merchant network. Martial artists from both the Merm Alliance and Unorthodox Alliance were gathering. Initially, the report was assumed to indicate a large-scale conflict between humans. However, the messenger quickly clarified that the real threat was different. The 100 demons were advancing toward Daunting Lake. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, the 100 demons roared and moved as one. Their killing intent surged outward like a tide, each of their instincts focused on one directive: hunt humans and consume them. Beakley Woon was already aware of the nature of the 100 demons. He understood that a Yakai realm forms when a great demon establishes dominion over a territory, transforming it into a corrupted zone. As long as one avoids entering that domain, survival is possible. However, lesser demons are drawn toward the location where the great demon has recently emerged, and their movement inevitably leads them toward human settlements. This coordinated migration is what is known as the 100 demons. The report confirmed that the 100 demons were heading directly toward Daunting Lake, originating from the Beijing direction, with an estimated scale of around 250. From this, it could be inferred that a great demon had already formed. The report further added that a month earlier, Chengha and Namong Wu had gone missing while investigating a series of disappearances. Beakley Woon frowned upon hearing this update, recognizing the seriousness of the situation. Additional information indicated that traces had been found at the entrance of the Yakai realm. The messenger concluded that if there had been no return within a month, the matter was to be reported directly to the Righteous Heaven Sect. Without hesitation, Beakley Woon decided to move immediately toward Beijing. When someone questioned whether he would attend the Yuyang assembly instead, he calmly responded that a formal summons had already been issued for the major sects to gather there, but he had no obligation to participate. The confusion grew when another asked about the enforcement units stationed at Daunting Lake. Beakley Woon explained that they were not required to respond to the summons, as their primary duty was to protect the champions of the two major schools. He added that the Righteous Heaven Sect branch in Yuyang would handle proper coordination of their return. More importantly, he emphasized that the priority was to eliminate the great demon before it fully absorbed the Yakai energy. If it succeeded, the region would be transformed into a true hellscape. As he assessed the situation, he briefly recalled a fragmented memory of someone once speaking to him cryptically about fate and destiny, hinting that his path was unusual. He dismissed the thought and focused on the immediate crisis. Elsewhere, O Ryong expressed anger and frustration, insisting that the Righteous Heaven Sect should clarify whether the Merm Alliance was treating them as expendable pieces and what Beakley Woon's true intentions were. At that moment, a sudden interruption occurred as Guang Yun arrived. He identified himself as the local Merm Alliance commander stationed in Yuyang and announced that the 100 demons were already approaching, turning the entire region into an imminent battlefield. He ordered everyone to return immediately to the training area for evacuation. O Ryong objected, questioning whether they were being told to abandon the battlefield. Guang Yun corrected her, stating that it was not desertion but a tactical retreat, as protecting them was the Merm Alliance's highest priority. O Ryong argued that they were capable of fighting, but Guang Yun cut her off sharply, reiterating that it was an order. He emphasized that there were far too many major sects involved and that they were not suited for direct combat in this situation. When resistance continued, he firmly stated that objections would not be accepted, reinforcing that lower ranks must obey higher commands without question. Ouyang reluctantly complied. Wu Gang, however, sensed something was wrong. Although the explanation sounded reasonable, Guang Yun appeared unusually tense, as if concealing deeper concern. He then ordered everyone once again to return, declaring that break time was over. Ouyang, still unsettled, wondered aloud what was truly happening. Munchio quietly raised a concern, suggesting that the commander might not be telling the full truth. He questioned why they were being pushed back to the training area if the situation was truly as dangerous as described, speculating that the commander likely already knew the outer defenses would be breached. Wang Jin, confused, asked for clarification, insisting that everyone had heard the same report about reinforcement from major sects arriving soon. Before he could finish, Wu Gang interrupted, raising a critical possibility. What if those reinforcements did not arrive in time? In that case, the commander's intention might be to draw the battle into the city while keeping non-combatants in a safer zone like the training area. Munchio, maintaining a rational stance, argued that these were only assumptions and that they should follow orders from higher authority. His statement triggered anger from others, who accused him of being overly submissive. He calmly defended himself, stating that they needed to consider the Sect position. However, he was interrupted again by objections, with others insisting that fleeing would result in civilian casualties. They reminded each other that, as temporary members of the Righteous Heaven Sect, abandoning the people in crisis would contradict their role as practitioners of the righteous path. Wu Gang firmly stated that they could not retreat under such circumstances, and others echoed his sentiment. Ouyang reinforced this view, declaring that as enforcers of martial order, they were bound to protect the people rather than withdraw. Munchio then suggested a compromise, proposing that they retreat first and re-engage only if necessary. This reasoning was reluctantly accepted, and a plan was formed. Wu Gang was assigned to quickly assess the scale of the 100 demons, while Ouyang and Wang Jin were tasked with surveying the terrain. Munchio and another companion would scout possible ambush locations. From this point onward, they resolved to actively track and prepare for the incoming threat. Gull, standing at the rear, remarked with disappointment that she had been forgotten in the planning, highlighting her exclusion from the group's immediate strategy. Meanwhile, in the forest, Beakley Woon analyzed the situation. Recalling his earlier experiences with merchant escorts, he noted that survival training always emphasized retreat and situational awareness. He also reasoned that if Namong Wu and Chung Ha were still alive within the affected zone, their supplies were likely running out. He observed the increasing spread of the infestation and expressed concern that the situation needed to be resolved quickly. Elsewhere, the 100 demons raged, their killing intent intensifying. One of them complained inwardly that intruders had disrupted its domain and that, despite only recently awakening as a great demon, humans had managed to conceal themselves within its territory. Enraged, it demanded that they reveal themselves. Chung Ha and Namong Wu were hiding nearby. Chung Ha assessed the enemy's overwhelming bloodlust, reluctantly admitting they should have eliminated it before it fully awakened. Namong Wu responded irritably, telling her to stop dwelling on it, though he still maintained confidence in his remaining strength. As tension escalated, Chung Ha signaled danger, and they prepared for combat. She suddenly launched a surprise attack, drawing the attention of the 100 demons. Namong Wu followed with a coordinated strike, successfully landing a hit, though Chung Ha immediately warned him to stay alert as the enemy counterattacked. The 100 demons retaliated violently, forcing Namong Wu to be thrown aside in pain. Chung Ha called out to him in alarm as the creature advanced. At that critical moment, one of the demon's arms was suddenly severed in a single strike. The creature howled in shock and rage. Beakley Woon then appeared calmly, remarking that they were lucky he had arrived before things became worse. Chung Ha immediately recognized him and called out to the team leader as he stepped into the battlefield. Beakley Woon immediately corrected Chung Ha, stating that she should address them properly as the Righteous Heaven Sect. Namong Wu, still lying on the ground, muttered that Beakley Woon had arrived too late. Beakley Woon responded with a calm smile, saying he had been busy and did not expect to personally clean up the battlefield at that hour. He then turned his attention forward, preparing for combat as the 100 demons charged at him. Chung Ha called out that a single decisive strike to the head would be enough to finish it, though Wu Gang found the situation questionable, thinking it odd that a single great demon could supposedly be handled so simply by two people. The 100 demons remained standing, unharmed, before suddenly leaping and mocking them. Beakly Woon remained fully alert and ordered the others to fall back as needed. At that moment, an unexpected figure appeared and greeted Beakly Woon, revealing familiarity between them. Beakly Woon recognized the Black Knight and remarked that it had been a long time since their last meeting, expressing surprise at his presence. The Black Knight, in turn, noted Beakly Woon's growth and asked why he was there.